Chapter 321. Tiggle Fortress. It was a mighty stronghold built at a vantage point in the Harem mountain range with mountains on all four sides. Established on a rugged terrain several hundred meters above sea level, it truly was a fortress blessed with natural defensive barriers. Not only did its geographical placement make it a reliable base for defending the road that led to the heart of the Federation, but it also served as a strategic location for protecting the border between the Federation and humanity. Realizing the importance of this location early on, the chief of the fallen angels, Gabriel, integrated her knowledge from another world with the dwarves' excellent craftsmanship and the spirits of the sky fairies to build the walls of the fortress through blood and sweat. As much as it was called the last bastion of the Federation, most people felt the same feeling when first standing in front of the fortress. Anyone that entered through its magnificent entranceway, which stood like an impregnable gate at the bottom of the cliff, and slowly walked up to the top would be able to see giant statues holding sharpened spears and swords carved into the sides of the cliff. When they arrived at the end, they would be confronted with the fortress rampart which stretched along the terrain as far as the eye could see like an endless highway. And once there, most people would fall into terror at the majestic and fear-striking sight of the upright fortress towering over them on a highland with flowing clouds, just like that of a painting. If one actually tried looking up from below the fortress, the person would be exhausted from just following up the cliff with their eyes, feeling it firsthand for themselves what impregnable truly meant. However, it was inevitable for amazing things to become familiar and new things to become worn out. Such was the natural order of the world. The mountains that surrounded Tiggle Fortress used to boast a dark green color full of vitality, but now everything was dyed crimson on a background of gray, making them look ominous. The dark red stains that persisted on them through many years were evidence of just how long a violent war had been taking place in this location. It was the same for Tiggle Fortress itself. There were so many scars of war on the fortress that it was shameful for it to have once been called the Tomb of the Corpse Army. It wasn't only because of the long war. At any rate, it was a stronghold that had fallen once. The Federation managed to succeed in recapturing it in the end, but there was no way that the parasites obediently retreated after their loss. The parasites enacted all kinds of brutal and wicked atrocities on the fortress, causing it to lose its once hoary color. And with it, its long-standing prestige was extinguished, just like the shriveled-up dead tree at the center of the stronghold. Of course, the Federation had restored the fortress to a certain extent after reclaiming it, but the fixes were only superficial. No matter how imposing its exterior looked, as long as the World Tree remained dead, the fact that the fortress was only a hollow shell of its former self was something that both the Federation and the parasites knew. Perhaps it was because of this that a negative atmosphere was flowing within the stronghold. It was unknown whether the anxiety within the fortress had an effect or not, but even the sky above it was blotted with dark clouds. Thanks to that, the weather couldn't get any more depressing. The sky fairies were aiming their notched bows forward, every single one of them with wide eyes filled with fear that couldn't be described with words. The cave fairies that were cursed by the elemental spirits all had their eyes covered with cloth, but it went without saying that they, too, were taut with anxiety, evident from how tightly they were gripping their weapons. That wasn't all. The dwarves were hard at work, making thunders even at this very moment while the beastmen had their claws raised and their fangs bared. All the Federation's forces, including its elite troops, were gathered on the fortress in an attempt to defend it. This was undoubtedly a grand spectacle. However, there was an impossible-to-hide terror hanging in the atmosphere. They had no choice but to be afraid. There was an absolutely overwhelming sight unfolding before them beyond the ridge. It was a terrifying sight that easily dwarfed the majestic presence of Tiggle Fortress. Corpse armies, reproductive species, mother species, the 5 armies, and the figure of the parasite queen relaxed on her throne, reigning over the entire sky. The screen flickering with static signals made it apparent that it was only a projection of her, but just the appearance of the enemy leader subjected the Federation to tremendous pressure. Gabriel, the chief of the fallen angels, looked up at the parasite queen, who was haughtily staring down at the fortress from the sky, and sighed quietly. Their morale had already hit rock bottom as it was. With the projection of the parasite queen, who was caged on her corrupted throne, appearing before them, there was no more need to talk about their state. On the one hand, they could feel a strong will transmitted from the enemy, the will of the parasite queen to surely bring down Tiggle Fortress again. She knew that she had to encourage her allies, but no words came out. They were faced with a war where defeat was as inevitable as fire, so she had no idea how to boost their morale. Gabriel stayed silent for a while before slightly raising her head and asking, "Do we know anything about humanity's movements?" Her question finally broke the long silence, but there was no reply. Gabriel let out a deep sigh. "I know our communications have been cut because of the signal jamming. I'm asking about our most recent contact." "About that?" A fallen angel, who stood near her, opened his mouth to say something with difficulty but mumbled his words. "What is it?" Gabriel gave a tired smile. "Did they say they won't help us since it wasn't their problem?" "We've received news that a draft call was made in 5 kingdoms, but—" The fallen angel trailed off his words. She didn't need to hear any further to infer that any further communications had been cut since parasites arrived. "A draft call, huh?" Gabriel's response was lukewarm. That was because she knew there was a very, very big difference between news of a draft call being made and the news of reinforcements being sent their way. Of course, there was a possibility that the royal families really did send their armies, but they won't be enough. They would be of some help against the corpse army, but the real help that the Federation needed was from the Earthlings. But whether the Earthlings that were practically without any order would obediently heed the draft call? Frankly speaking, Gabriel was skeptical. Furthermore, the problem was that even if the Earthlings came, their chances of victory were still unknown. The parasite queen seemed hell-bent on conquering their fortress, as it looked like she practically brought her entire force. The only solace was that Twisted Kindness, who was known to be unrivaled in one-on-one battles, was nowhere to be seen, but this didn't comfort her at all. No matter how she looked at the situation, there was no hope, only despair. Gabriel muttered to herself while in deep distress. "It would be nice if the executors came. It'll be better if you don't place your hopes on them." Gabriel heard a husky voice that was mixed with a growl at that moment. It was a sturdy and muscular beastman with a mane flowing from the lines on his face. "When our home was taken over, those bastards only looked at us like they were looking at a blazing fire from across the river. Those bastards did nothing when the executor who was coming to our aid with a small number of people was ambushed and killed. What are you expecting from these shameless bastards?" "Well, I know how you feel about humanity as the king ruling over an entire race, but—" Gabriel let out a sigh. It was already her 3rd time sighing. "No matter what your story with them is, we can't help but hope they will answer our call. We're in a situation where every extra hand is vital." "Ridiculous. You've always emphasized rationality before." "Still. Who knows?" Gabriel looked at that shriveled-up tree before faintly laughing. "That world tree over there in a sorry state might just suddenly spring back to life." "Funny. Did you finally go crazy now that the enemy is right in front of us?" The beastman snorted. "Didn't you believe that you should do your best in what you can instead of meaninglessly clinging to impossible tasks? It's because a human that went and accomplished one of those impossible tasks said he'd personally head out." Gabriel retorted without showing any change in expression. In response, the beastman suddenly shut his mouth. "Sol Jihu, was it? The hero who killed the first army commander, the infamous vanguard of the parasite queen that struck terror throughout paradise. The weight his name carried was certainly not light. Indeed. I've heard quite a bit of how he was a man of great ability, enough to make my ears buzz. Yes. The Federation would be receiving an enormous boon if he really manages to revive the World Tree. How about it? Wouldn't you be willing to put down your grudges with the humans and think about becoming allies with them then? Huh. Let's talk about this after we see the results. The Beastman King snorted at the optimistic, what-ifs. The World Tree's revival, hee hee. If he truly manages to accomplish that, then I am willing to change my mind about the humans who accompany that person. He didn't completely turn down the suggestion. It was because he knew just how difficult the task was, which was to the point that even the Federation had given up on it. That was why if Sol Jihu really pulled it off. It was at that moment. Right when their words came to a lull, the projection of the parasite queen waved her hand in a wide arc. And following that, several hundreds of nests could be seen settling down on the ground in organized droves and begin bulging their bodies. Gabriel's eyebrows subtly knitted. The nests simultaneously sent their roots down into the ground. It was the sign that signaled the parasite's attack. The infestation had begun. And sure enough, they're coming. The corpse army finally started to take action, just like the Beastman said. The small dots in the distances gradually became bigger while the surrounding slopes began to be filled with black figures. A sinister rumbling filled the surrounding air as they approached closer, moment by moment. They could feel their hair rising as the very ground beneath them began trembling even when they were standing on the fortress. Damn it. Is this how it felt? I'm sorry, okay? Gabriel muttered something incomprehensible before grinding her teeth. Even though they were in a dilemma of having to defend their base despite needing to quickly go out and get rid of the nests, they couldn't just sit there and do nothing. After barely managing to shake off the oppressive sensation, Gabriel shouted while looking at the dark wave that was sweeping all the mountains in their sight like a tsunami. All units. When she shouted at the top of her voice, the sky fairies raised their bows in unison. Underneath the arrowheads were stones that let off electric sparks. The thunder attached to them trembled left and right as they emitted a blue light. Fire! With that word, a sharp wind swept through the whole area. A sonic boom was followed by a piercing shriek before a deafening thunderclap shook the entire world. Asterisk. Meanwhile, Sol Jihu, who had thrown himself into the smoke hole, scrunched his face at the sharp pain on his chin. Ow, ow, ow. The moment he was about to get up while stroking his chin, he suddenly felt another strong impact on his back. When he shouted in pain and looked behind him, he could see Phi Sora, who was treating him as a cushion with her eyes tightly closed. When she peeked her eyes open, she realized the situation and quickly got off him. I am sorry. No, it's fine. More importantly, looking around, he found the members that entered the hole in the second round. It seemed like they had entered as soon as the first team passed through. This meant that everyone had landed in the same place. Sol Jihu, who whimpered as he pushed himself off the ground, suddenly fell in a daze. The sky was red. No. The entire world was dyed in a blood-red color. It was difficult to say that his surroundings looked nice, even with empty words. The plants that would have once created beautiful scenery were all withered and bent. It was a different sensation from the sight he saw at the Delphinian Duchy. If what he saw back then was an already dead world, then this place looked like a dying world. It was just like a gasping patient that was on the verge of death. In any case, such things weren't important since they managed to cross over to this place. The important thing now was whether they arrived at the spirit realm or not. Their answer was given to them shortly after. What's that? Sol Jihu, who had been dumbfoundedly looking around, fixed his gaze in the direction that Kazuki had pointed. Then, he became utterly speechless. An appalling sight was being unfolded in that direction. Strange figures numbering in the hundreds, or even thousands, could be seen. They were beings that they've never seen before in their lives, but seeing how they were dyed in a dark shade of one of 5 colors, it was obvious that they were spirits at first glance. However, the majority of these spirits were dying. While appearing to be lesser in numbers, bright blue, haze-like things were slaughtering the spirits with an overwhelming disparity in strength. Most of the spirits were being extinguished without even being able to escape, and even those that were desperately resisting were surrounded by these hazes and soon scattered into ash. Since they weren't able to fight back, the number of spirits, which was initially in the thousands, was quickly falling.
Get a hold of yourself. Sol Jihu came back to his senses when a stern voice rang in his ears.
He got up to his feet and focused as he saw Baek Haiju holding her light green spear in front of him.
The situation was clear.
The fortune amidst all the misfortunes was that the spirit realm hadn't completely fallen. The spirits were still fighting. Of course, it was correct to say that it was a one-sided massacre, but the important thing was that the spirit realm hadn't been destroyed yet. That fact alone was enough for them to act. They hadn't imagined that they would witness such a sight as soon as they arrived, but that just meant that the situation was that urgent. If so, then there was only one thing left to do.
Sol Jihu roughly swung his arm and cut the rope wrapped around his wrist.
He stood his ground and tightly grabbed the spear of purity before pointing at the strange blue, haze-like creatures that were ruthlessly slaughtering the spirits.
And then, all units
at Tiggle Fortress and the Spirit Realm,
prepare for battle.
The fateful battles that would decide the future of Paradise commenced simultaneously at two locations.
Chapter 322. Quing. A metallic whistle of a sword being drawn rang out.
As soon as Sol Jihu gave his command, everyone cut off the rope and raised their weapons to prepare for battle.
I have to investigate a bit more.
He didn't feel right commanding everyone to charge forward out of the blue. However, they didn't have time. The spirits were very clearly on the verge of death, helpless against the onslaught of the attackers. If I can save even one of them, I should be able to get information on the current state of the spirit realm. Thinking so, Sol Jihu kicked off the ground in full force. He planned to save the spirits first.
With over 10 people simultaneously making a move, the enemy noticed them instantly.
They stopped their massacre and turned to look.
Then, when they saw the members of the expedition team that were charging toward them, hic!
They changed their course with a shrill, bone-chilling scream. "They're coming!" Phi Sora shouted as strange gaseous lifeforms glowing blue closed in on them in an instant like the blowing wind.
Will-o-wisps.
At a closer distance, the creature's blue light was even more distinctive. Blazing like flames from a gas stove, the ghostly lights flew over like tiny comets.
Although Sol Jihu wanted to observe them a bit more. Crackle! With the scorching fire nearly touching him, Sol Jihu stabbed forward with his tightly gripped spear.
Then, he immediately paused in hesitation. It would be normal to feel the spear blade penetrating something, but no such sensation was transmitted to his palms. But he expected as much since he was stabbing a gaseous lifeform.
The reason he paused was because the enemy froze as soon as his spear blade pierced it. Kurr! Kurr! Unable to move an inch, the will-o-wisp let out a bizarre cry while convulsing painfully. On closer inspection, holy energy could be seen flowing out of the evil exterminating weapon, the spear of purity, and disturbing the will-o-wisp's insides.
Don't tell me.
Thinking what if, Sol Jihu immediately roused the anti-evil energy.
Then, as a golden current violently gushed out of the spear tip, a sound akin to a balloon popping boom struck his ears.
Kia! Kia!
The blue gaseous lifeform exploded, its color dimming in an instant. The will-o-wisp seemed to be vanishing just like that, but then it disappeared into the horizon as if it was sucked in by something unknown. Sol Jihu's eyes narrowed, seeing the lifeform disappearing in an instant. What was that? He couldn't help but think that it was too easy. However, his hesitation didn't last long. Not only was he still in the midst of battle, but another will-o-wisp had also flown toward him. Sol Jihu pulled his upper body back and threw his arm up. As the spear blade emitting a golden light vertically swept the will-o-wisp, it was split in half and melted down without uttering its death throe. Immediately afterward, 4 will-o-wisps simultaneously rushed at him from 4 directions, but the result was no different.
When Sol Jihu swung his spear, they exploded with no resistance. It was really a piece of cake.
What was surprising was that Sol Jihu wasn't the only one overwhelming the enemy.
Cho Hong and Hugo were also pushing the enemy back, swinging the thorn of steel radiating white light and an axe carrying holy energy, respectively.
While they weren't overwhelming the enemy like Sol Jihu, they were fighting them off with no difficulties. Phi Sora had even run into the midst of the enemy forces and was showing off a sword dance in high spirits. As a sword-scattering flames danced freely in all directions, any will-o-wisp that was touched by it was quickly devoured by the flames. With high rankers and even a level 4 doing so well, there was no need to say anything about the higher-leveled combatants. The expedition team subjugated the enemy forces in an instant, and the battle ended earlier than anyone expected.
What's going on? Aren't these guys too weak?
Yeah, that was too easy. Cho Hong and Hugo, who had a good exercise, spoke with a laugh as they wiped their sweats. They were rather nervous before the fight, but with such an easy victory in their first battle, they were overjoyed. Sol Jihu kept silent as he was about to say something. Subjugating the enemy wasn't a bad thing, and morale was an important aspect of any battle.
He kept quiet, not wanting to ruin the festive mood, but it wasn't that he wasn't suspicious of the situation.
Some of the others seemed to be thinking the same thing as Agnes, Rahi, and a couple of others were also silently in deep thought.
Nightshades. Philip Muller calmly spoke up.
They're spirit creatures, that subsist off of yin or negative energy. You mean the guys we just fought? That's right. There's just one thing.
Philip Muller trailed off, then smacked his lips.
Something strange.
I assumed there would be at least one army commander in the spirit realm.
This isn't just a guess.
Although the parasites have 7 armies, 2 of them almost never appeared in the material realm, or the middle world, since very early on. 2 armies.
The 4th Army Commander, Raging Temperance, and the 7th Army Commander, Twisted Kindness. These 2 didn't appear even in the past all-out war when the parasites conquered Tiggle Fortress. Though it isn't as if they're completely shrouded in mystery, they're still the hardest to see army commanders among the 7. Sol Jihu nodded his head. So which part is strange?
Hear me out.
From what we know, Raging Temperance is from the mythical beast race, while Twisted Kindness is the last member of the dragon race.
Philip Muller continued. But the spirit creatures you just saw are normally from the spiritual dimension. They have nothing to do with mythical beasts or dragons. In other words, a race that should have no connection with the invading army commanders were in the spirit realm.
Why would that be? This wasn't so unacceptable given the parasite's uniqueness as a species, but there were definitely more than 1 or 2 suspicious points. As spirit creatures didn't have physical bodies, it was hard to say they were a part of the corpse army, and they couldn't be considered a reproductive species birthed by mother species for the same reason.
In that case, they had to be the army under the banner of an army commander. What are the chances that there is another army commander here?
There's Exploding Patience, who is also a spirit creature, but I heard her army consists entirely of banshees.
I've never heard of her leading an army of nightshades.
As Philip Muller explained, Sol Jihu's expression turned complicated.
It really is strange.
But it isn't as if I'm out of guesses.
Philip Muller suddenly lowered his volume and whispered.
Though there's no way to be sure, I heard something from the previous Star of Sloth. The previous Star of Sloth?
I'm talking about the executor who preceded Tatiana Chinzia. Philip Muller continued. After becoming an executor, he fought the 4th Army commander once.
He barely escaped death and came back.
That was when he said that Raging Temperance was a unicorn. Unicorn.
Here's the problem. It's true that unicorns are of the mythical beast race, but they still have nothing to do with the spiritual dimension.
It was at this moment that Sol Jihu realized Philip Muller's guess and what he was trying to say.
You're saying the identity of raging temperance might have changed. That could be it, or there might be something we don't quite understand. We have to be open to all possibilities.
Sol Jihu bit his lip as something Gabriel told him in the past suddenly crossed his mind. A new card. Survival of the fittest.
It was a simple concept.
If the parasite queen found a stronger race, there was nothing holding her back from changing out one of the commanders. In any case, nothing was confirmed yet.
They couldn't jump to any conclusions.
They would have to see with their own eyes to be sure. I know you're talking, but… At that moment, the silently listening Kazuki cut in between them. He raised his finger and pointed to the front. A small group of spirits that survived the Nightshade's attack was murmuring among themselves.
Humans?
Aren't they humans? No way! How can humans enter this world? Sol Jihu swallowed his saliva.
Each of the spirits shone in one of the 5 colors, having a wide variety of appearances ranging from animals to a small girl.
They were all small. Frankly, they didn't look all that powerful.
They defeated those bastards.
Maybe they're here to help. I might believe that if they were sky fairies.
But humans? But it's true they helped. They saved us.
Wait, there's an aura of a spirit I've never felt before.
Judging by the way they were talking among themselves, it was obvious that they were young.
Still, they should be able to explain the spirit realm's current state. When Sol Jihu walked forward, the spirits' gazes all turned toward him, looking up with unbridled eyes.
Help us, please help. Save the kings, please save our world.
They began to chatter in front of his foot.
As Sol Jihu stood in a fluster from the spirits pulling on his leg, he flinched, feeling something poking his neck.
Partner. Little Chick was standing on his shoulder before he noticed. Let me talk to these youngins. Why you? I'm curious about a few things. Sol Jihu thought for a moment before nodding his head. Since Little Chick was also a spirit, it should have an easier time talking with the spirits. Little Chick jumped down once it received Sol Jihu's permission.
As soon as it landed on the ground, the pestering spirits were all shocked. Who's this? What do you think?
I'm a spirit, just like you.
But I've never seen a spirit like you. That's obvious. That's the way it should be.
It wouldn't make sense if you youngins knew about me.
This smell. It's the smell of the 5 elements and even the sealed light and darkness. Just who are you?
Quiet. Even your kings wouldn't dare to talk to me that way. A low-ranked spirit should talk respectfully when speaking with their elders. When Little Chick raised its voice, the spirits immediately quit chattering.
They must have felt the difference in their leagues as they all looked dejected.
Anyway, I have a few questions to ask you all. Little Chick cleared its throat and spoke.
If you haven't realized already, these humans are reinforcements sent by the Sky Fairies to save our world.
Meaning, we are allies.
Hearing this, the spirits' complexions brightened. But we just got here, so we know nothing about the details. Every second of every minute counts.
Answer to the best of your abilities, got it? Good. First, where are the spirit kings? Opening square bracket ellipsis dot closing square bracket. I can feel them, but it's too faint.
Just what the hell happened for the spirit realm to turn out like this? They were captured. What?
When a spirit retorted in a dejected voice, Little Chick furrowed its brows instantly.
Captured? Ifrit, Aqua, Terra, Aya, and Sylphid. All 5 were captured?
The enemy they were fighting was too scary.
Sobs were heard from the small spirits.
Little Chick let out a dumbfounded laugh, then gritted its teeth.
Damn it, then what about the 2 spirit lords?
Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. I'm talking about Afinu odor and Diffidum odor.
We don't know. We were told we can't unseal them so recklessly.
Idiots! Little Chick burst out before the spirit finished.
Those shit for brain bastards.
Even in such a situation.
Its short hair stood on ends as it shook furiously.
Partner. After muttering with a heavy pant, Little Chick turned its head and looked up at Sol Jihu. The situation is worse than we expected. If it's okay with you, I'd like the team to prioritize rescuing the Spirit Kings.
Rescuing the Spirit Kings. There was no problem doing it if it would help with saving the spirit realm, but Sol Jihu asked regardless.
Are they alive? I can feel them. Little Chick clicked its tongue and spoke. Spirits are mortal existences, but they don't return to nothingness after death.
Instead, they return to the world tree and reincarnate.
You can think of it as an eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But the world tree is dead. Since this cycle is broken, spirits should disappear when they die. That should be the case, but… Little Chick paused before sighing. But the Spirit Kings that were captured long ago aren't dead yet.
It's also strange that they're all in the same place.
I have a bad feeling about this.
If left alone, I'm afraid.
Little Chick trailed off, but Sol Jihu understood what it was trying to say. Well, I don't see why not.
He also had a feeling that something terrible would happen if the Spirit Kings were left in the enemy's hands.
On the other hand,
rescuing them quickly and receiving their help seemed to be a good idea. As kings of a world, the Spirit Kings should be helpful in fighting the commanders.
All right. Do you know where they are? I do. It's where the world tree is. Sol Jihu's eyes lit up.
Let's go. There's no need to delay then.
Let's go together. We'll help too.
Hearing Sol Jihu's reply to Little Chick, the young spirits eagerly spoke. However, Little Chick snorted and refused adamantly. Don't be ridiculous.
You twerps can't even handle a single spirit creature. Still.
Listen to me.
I'm not telling you to just sit here and do nothing. I'm sure you have your circumstances, but you must have been traveling to save the Spirit Kings because you were pushed to a corner and didn't have any other choice. The spirits nodded carefully. Tisk. If the lowest rank and low rank spirits are doing this, it's easy to see what happened to the higher ranked guys. Little Chick spoke regretfully.
Dragging this out will only put the enemies in a more advantageous position.
It's a do or die situation now. You guys spread out and gather everyone.
Gather everyone?
There must be other remnant groups in hiding.
Bring them with you to the fight. At the very least, you can act as our shields.
Even if you die, you'll come back to life once the world tree revives.
You can resurrect world tree Nim.
I don't have time to sit around and explain. Just do as I say.
This is a pressing matter.
The longer you guys take, the smaller the chances get of us saving the Spirit Kings. Got that? Little Chick emphasized the urgency of the matter multiple times, and the spirits finally looked convinced. Got it.
Then we'll meet up at the world tree? We'll hurry and bring as many spirits as we can.
It wouldn't be strange for them to ask for protection since they could be ambushed again.
Sol Jihu couldn't help but feel a little proud seeing the little guys courageously scattering in all directions.
No. Perhaps this was only natural. Unable to see any hope for the future, they were charging forward with their lives on the line out of pure desperation. Since a lifeline was suddenly thrown at them from the sky, it made sense for them to grab onto it with all their might. If only Earthlings were half as courageous and resolute as them. Sol Jihu chuckled before shaking the thought off his head. Let's go. I'll take the lead, partner. The expedition team began to march with Little Chick at the head. Sol Jihu fell silent, walking quietly while being wary of his surroundings. Little Chick said the Spirit Kings are around the world tree? This meant he could potentially achieve his two goals simultaneously. If all goes well, the expedition they expected to be greatly difficult might just end easily. Just like how their first battle ended with an easy victory. Of course, he wasn't all that optimistic.
It would be great if everything went smoothly like a sailboat following a fair wind, but the parasites weren't fools that could be looked down on.
I doubt they'd stay still. Just as he thought that. Suddenly. I have a theory I've kept to myself. I haven't said it until now because it was all a conjecture. Sol Ji-hoo remembered the words Ian spoke before he died. Sol.
Right now, the parasite queen, for whatever reason, is being greedy.
The reason she's left humanity alone as much as possible.
The reason she suddenly abandoned Tiggle Fortress and attacked Haramark.
And
the reason 2 of the 7 armies aren't in the material realm.
Mulling over each word he heard back then, Sol Ji-hoo unknowingly bit his lower lip.
If we think hard and connect these together, I believe we'll be able to arrive at the answer, at the key to defeating the parasites. Don't try to understand everything now.
If it's you, you'll be able to understand what I mean one day. So for now, just remember what I told you. So, run. Master Ian.
His heart became heavy as he recalled the warm, genial old magician.
In truth, he still wasn't sure what he meant. But,
then I will answer you.
As everyone's representative, he knew one thing for certain. Yes.
It certainly is worth it to protect a star that even the parasite queen fears.
Right. There must be a reason. A reason that Ian told him to abandon everyone and escape alone. 1. Spirit creatures are different from spirits, as is explained further on. Chapter 323. The expedition team decided on a course of action.
The world tree only grew in a specific area of the spirit realm. And currently, the 5 spirit kings were being held captive in that place. If all went well, they would be solving 2 difficult problems at once. However, even a child would know things wouldn't go so smoothly. The parasites would try to hinder their plans without a doubt, and the key to success was to effectively break through the parasites' plan. Sol Ji-hoo hastened the march just in case, but the expedition team was slowed down as time went on. Not by their will, but by outside intervention.
Little Chick, who was leading the expedition team with its hurried steps, suddenly halted.
What's wrong? They're already here.
Little Chick groaned, then sighed. Damn it. We still have ways to go before we get to the center.
That was too quick.
The startled Sol Ji-hoo looked around his surroundings. Now that Little Chick mentioned it, their surroundings were oddly quiet. It was so quiet, in fact, that it seemed dreary. Moreover, though he wasn't sure whether he was mistaken, a buzzing ringing reverberated in his ears. The vibration was full of the negative yin energy he felt when the nightshades were massacring the spirits. It looks like the enemy is making their move. Little Chick muttered as he quickly shot back. At the same time, the ringing in their ears stopped. Just as the surroundings regained its dead silence.
They're coming.
A haze began to flare up around them less than a second later.
The haze gradually turned blue and changed into the shape of will-o'-wisps. Don't underestimate them. Their numbers are incomparable to that of last time. As Little Chick said, the enemy forces springing up around them were uncountably many. There were so many of them that Sol Ji-hoo thought all the nightshades in the spirit realm gathered here. Pressured by the sheer number of nightshades, the expedition team immediately took action. Before Sol Ji-hoo even gave the command, the team formed a circular defensive formation around the magician and the 2 priests.
Ooh! At that moment, Audrey Basilar screamed.
It was because a large number of nightshades suddenly spawned in the air next to them and rushed toward them simultaneously. While Audrey Basilar was taken aback by the unexpected attack, Philip Muller, who was on high alert, moved quickly. Chanting a spell in an instant, he pointed his long oak staff in her direction. As he opened his closed eyes in a squint, bullet. His thick robe fluttered in a huge motion, and a convex barrier appeared in front of her. The nightshades that rammed into the barrier were all bounced back before exploding in the air. That wasn't the end.
Philip Muller retracted his staff, then immediately opened up his book.
The pages automatically flipped like a leaf in a breeze. The book stopped somewhere in the middle, and Philip Muller tilted his chin up and looked up into the air.
Avar Ava Avarisha. Dozens of spinning magic circles appeared in the air.
Soon, the spinning stopped, and the geometric shapes inside the magic circles shone in a pale color.
In the next moment, the few dozen magic circles all flashed, shooting out various magic spells. Boom, 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 boom.
As magic spells rained down like a passing shower, the nightshades cried out in agony. A single man instantly bombarding such a huge group of monsters to death made the expedition members cheer together.
Of course, given the sheer number of enemies, a good number of lucky nightshades broke through the explosions. However, these monsters were quickly dispatched by Agnes. In a fit of rage, she swept the enemies flying in from all directions. As she spread her arms out and opened her palm, silver threads constantly shot out of her fingertips. Surprisingly, the released threads coiled around the gaseous nightshades like spiderwebs and bound them. Then when Agnes flicked her arm fiercely, they were torn into pieces and ceased to exist. What terrifying power! Sol Jihu's jaw dropped slightly. I knew they were strong, but this…
Sol Jihu couldn't hide his shock at the fact that Philip Muller and Agnes' true abilities easily massacred such a large army. Most of the other members had similar reactions, but the two members who annihilated the enemy had dissatisfied expressions. Each fight just leaves me with more questions.
Philip Muller closed his book with a tap and murmured to himself. I agree.
There's certainly enough to kill young spirits, but they're nothing compared to the 7 armies.
I almost feel bad comparing the two.
Agnes seemed to think the same thing. And Sol Jihu was no different. There was nothing wrong with nice and easy battles. The problem was that these battles shouldn't be this easy given the nature of the expedition. The tiny bit of divinity I couldn't digest. A leftover, if you will. Anyways, it turns out that putting this leftover in the solar plexus has the greatest effect. Because of it, my subordinates were able to grow stronger too.
According to Undying Diligence, a commander's army consisted of members of the commander's race who absorbed remnants of divinity that the commander failed to digest. Even a tiny fragment of divinity was still divinity. Since they carried divine power, they should be multiple times stronger than normal. Why are they so weak? For Sol Jihu, who could barely take on a single vampire even with the help of Floan, he had no choice but to agree with Agnes and Philip Muller's opinions. It's also strange that we're seeing spirit creatures when the commander is a mythical beast. Sol Jihu scratched his head, not knowing what to make out of this. That wasn't his only worry. A huge number of enemies had suddenly appeared on their marching path. This could only mean one thing: the master of the nightshades had noticed their presence. Otherwise, so many nightshades couldn't have appeared at the same time.
What's that? At that moment, Hugo yelled out. Sol Jihu snapped out of his thoughts, and his eyes widened. A strange phenomenon was happening at the place where the nightshades exploded like fireworks. The ones that died earlier on were being sucked away, leaving behind long tails. Back then, he didn't see well because they were in the middle of a battle and only one nightshade flew off. But this time, with so many of them dying at the same time, the phenomenon was easier to see. There was one other thing that was different this time around. That was that the nightshades that turned faint from exploding didn't fly far away like the first time. They were gathering in a nearby area, in the air about 1 meter above the ground. As a terrifying number of hazy figures clumped together, the entire area looked like it was shimmering. That's… As Chohong knitted her brows, an arrow cut through the air with a sharp sonic boom. Feeling that something was gravely wrong, Kazuki had followed his instinct and shot an arrow at it. However, the arrow passed through the gas, and the spherical clump of gas became thicker while turning blue. A big frown formed on Kazuki's face. It's too late.
It was just as he said. The gas sphere mutated in a split second. It grew in size as if to take a certain shape. Crackle!
Then, a deep blue blaze flared up, and a figure popped out from the flames.
It was a beast-shaped monster resembling a horse with a conical horn on its forehead. Right, almost like a white unicorn.
Unicorn?
When Sol Jihu's thoughts reached this point, the beast's long muzzle opened. I see. It was you all.
An unpleasant voice akin to forcefully scratching a rusty iron rang out.
No, the unpleasant sensation wasn't just because of its voice. From the moment this enemy made its appearance, Sol Jihu had felt that something was off. On the surface, it was undoubtedly a beautiful unicorn with a sacred air, but a part of it felt uncomfortably dark. Its lustrous white hair was like that, and so was its mane, horn, and body. There was something about them that felt dark.
It was inexplicably unpleasant, uncomfortable, and nauseously revolting. So predictable, so expected, so obvious.
So the queen's insight is truly incredible.
Sol Jihu furrowed his brows. What it just muttered under its breath made it sound like the parasite queen knew about the expedition team entering the spirit realm. In that case, this bizarre creature that made him all too reluctant to call it a unicorn had to have been waiting for the expedition team's arrival.
Good, very good. I was just getting tired of being stuck in this place while doing nothing but hunting weak runaway spirits.
This is perfect.
Let's see.
The unicorn nodded its head and looked down at the expedition team from the air with a rather arrogant expression.
Ho! 2 executors and, Its eyes were indifferent even when it saw Baek Haiju.
But upon discovering Seo Yuhui, they lit up all of a sudden.
It finished scanning the expedition team before putting on a proud face. Ku-hoo-hoo, this damned body. It's instantly become excited.
Sol Jihu doubted his ears.
I just can't understand this race. Females are all the same.
Why obsess over pure maidens?
It had been muttering to itself for a while now.
Sol Jihu couldn't understand why it referred to its own body in third person and called it a damned body. But not caring for Sol Jihu's thoughts, the unicorn flaunted its tongue while giving lecherous glances. The female members of the expedition team, like Seo Yuhui and Phi Sora, shuddered. The horse's eyes slanting up to a crescent shape was weird enough, but when its crude gaze scanned their bodies, chills went down their backs as if there were caterpillars crawling all over them.
You!
Failing to withstand the unpleasant feeling, Phi Sora rubbed her arms and twisted her body.
Seeing this, the unicorn guffawed as though it was cute. You look like a healthy female. Great! I will give you special care and attention, human female. Fucking hell. Phi Sora growled.
The hell are you saying, you shitty horse?
Ooh. Feisty. I love it.
Don't worry.
I might look like a Horus, but my junior is long and beefy.
The unicorn retorted with a grin.
Look forward to it.
Once you taste my thing, you won't be able to escape the pleasure of your stomach bulging out. What?
Phi Sora's eyes shot open. But before she bellowed in rage, Sol Jihu stepped in. Are you the parasite's 4th Army commander, Raging Temperance?
With an uninvited guest suddenly interfering, the gleeful unicorn frowned. However, after carefully studying Sol Jihu, it blinked its eyes and exclaimed.
Oh ho, I see. You are the one that the queen mentioned.
You're the one who summoned the nightshades?
The unicorn didn't answer. Although it showed interest in Sol Jihu for a moment, that was it. Well, that's enough chit-chatting. Let's get down to business now.
What business? Sol Jihu's eyes narrowed.
He had a feeling that the unicorn changed the topic on purpose.
Do I need to explain? But that wasn't the important thing.
You have to break through me, and I have to stop you. The winner takes all.
Very simple. As soon as it finished this sentence, the dim, hazy energy around it instantly turned clear. Then, the terrifying pressure that the unicorn was giving off revealed itself and pressed down on the expedition team. Don't be scared. This bastard is the leader of a bunch of weaklings. How strong can it be?
Phi Sora shouted in high spirits as if to shake off the pressure. However, "Pa-ha-ha-ha!" The unicorn cackled with its head tilted back. Funny. Very funny.
Revealing its buck teeth in a grin, it glanced at Phi Sora with a pitying gaze.
Truly an idiotic female.
Shouting so triumphantly after defeating trash that is only a part of this body. A remnant energy that I released. With that final word, its voice suddenly vibrated out, causing the expedition members to flinch.
The aura of the unicorn took a complete turn. It now gave a bone-chilling aura that made their skins tingle. On one hand, Sol Ji-hoo nervously raised his guard against the 4th Army commander that finally revealed its full presence. On the other, he tilted his head curiously.
A part of its body? Remnant energy?
He recalled the unicorn's strange words.
Though it was hard to pinpoint, it seemed a bit different than the 1st Army commander. Undying Diligence had shared the divinity it couldn't absorb with members of his race and treated them as his subordinates. But this unicorn. How should he put this? Rather than forming an army or a battalion of subordinates, it was treating them like trash, no different than leftover food that was thrown out.
Q-ha-hoo-hoo. I would have been disappointed if they gave you trouble.
This is fantastic.
Since you've got such a foul, manly mouth, you must surely have the ability to back it up.
A vigorous voice resounded in Sol Ji-hoo's ears repeatedly.
It wasn't just the aura that was different. The unicorn was much bigger than when it first appeared. Hold on. He wasn't mistaken.
The unicorn was standing when it first appeared, but now it had gotten bulkier and was standing on the ground on 4 legs.
You might not know.
The clacking of its hooves resounded loudly.
Shit.
Sol Ji-hoo's brain frantically sent warning signals, causing him to strengthen his grip on the spear of purity reflexively. With the body of a mythical beast, am.
In the next moment, the unicorn snorted as its pitch-black pupils flashed blue.
The strongest spirit creature of the spiritual dimension.
Shortly afterward, the unicorn tossed its head up as if a rider forcefully pulled on its reins. Now then.
At the same time, it opened its mouth wide and shouted with a thunderous voice.
I will show you the power of a Darkshini. 1. Also known as Amanojaku, in Japanese folklore.
It is a type of yokai or oni.
Chapter 324. The unicorn reared its forelegs, then slammed them down on the ground. Boom!
A thunderous roar exploded, striking Sol Ji-hoo's ears. The barren land fissured, and an earthquake occurred.
The force of the blow was so powerful that even the fully on guard Sol Ji-hoo teetered.
The same thing happened to the other members of the expedition team.
Maria fell on her butt and even the archers who had an excellent sense of balance staggered. Before anyone could regain their balance, the unicorn howled fiercely and kicked off the ground. Sharp haze exploded out from its body as it charged straight at the expedition team. The terrifying speed of the unicorn made it difficult to determine whether the things scattering behind it were nightshades or simple afterimages. Spread out! Baek Haiju shouted uncharacteristically. She then rushed forward and planted her feet on the ground. At the same time, the unicorn headbutted the sacred empress. Kahook! Baek Haiju was continuously pushed back, leaving behind a long track and quickly breaking away from the rest of the expedition team. Although she seemed to be holding her ground even as she was being pushed back, Sol Ji-hoo couldn't hide his shock. Baek Haiju lasted a long time even when she was fighting the 1st Army commander alone. Yet, this time, she failed to withstand even a single blow. Prrrrrr. With a snort, the unicorn changed its course. Should I stop it or dodge it?
After a split second of hesitation, Sol Jihu made up his mind. It was because Philip Muller chanted a teleport spell and moved behind Baek Haiju with the two priests. He had some peace of mind now that the targets he had to protect were away from the enemy. However, he soon realized that this line of thinking was wrong.
There was a reason Baek Haiju shouted at everyone to spread out.
If clustered together, the unicorn's terrifying destructive power could defeat them in one go, so the purpose of spreading out was to scatter its attention as much as possible.
And so, the remaining members backed off in all directions and distanced themselves as much as possible.
However, the unicorn's speed surpassed their imaginations. Rather, even with such a frightening charge speed, it was extremely deft in cornering. It instantly caught up to a retreating member and curled its body. The spectating Sol Jihu's jaw dropped.
It was because the unicorn's posture was similar to his own while using flash step. Watch out! Shit!
Despite Sol Jihu's warning, Phi Sora, who became the target of the unicorn's attack, spat out a curse and raised her shield.
She had given up on running away, realizing she would never be able to escape from its range.
Eventually, the unicorn bounced up like a spring and rammed Phi Sora with the horn on its forehead. A white film in front of her collapsed as the horn tore through the barrier like a piece of paper.
Continuing onward, it even pierced her shield and simultaneously dug into Phi Sora's chest. Awk!
Phi Sora flew into the air, splashing fresh blood, before being knocked down with a great force.
She quivered uncontrollably, her eyes turned inside out as though she had lost control of her body. The unicorn lifted its head and howled proudly. Miss Phi Sora! A snort was heard again. The unicorn adjusted its posture as if to say it would finish off one person right here, right now. Sol Jihu's eyes shot open with a flash. A golden current surged up from the bottom of his feet. Rather than running at the convulsing Phi Sora, Sol Jihu used flash thunder and rushed towards the Fourth Army commander. The unicorn stopped and glanced at Sol Jihu. Even though he was flying forward like a beam of light, it didn't look all that impressed.
Although it gave up on Phi Sora and turned its body, it wasn't because it was forced to.
Its attitude was more similar to, "Let's see what you've got." While rushing in, Sol Jihu thrust his arms forward with all his might. A sword chi radiating golden light shot out of the spear blade cutting through the air. The unicorn stood still until the sword chi was on the brink of piercing through its body. Then, it snorted and moved its four legs.
What? Sol Jihu's breath stopped. Just as he thought his attack reached the enemy, the unicorn moved sideways in a fluid motion. The spear of purity inevitably pierced through an afterimage. Although Sol Jihu immediately struck sideways with his spear, the unicorn stepped back just as fluidly as before and dodged the attack once again. Its movement and speed truly defied the laws of physics. Only then did Sol Jihu realize that his speed was far too inferior when compared to raging temperances even with flash thunder. Don't get cocky.
The unicorn furrowed its brows.
It wouldn't be enough even if you went all out, yet you dare to make a probing attack.
For some reason, it sounded like its pride had been severely wounded.
The Fourth Army commander must have judged that Sol Jihu was holding back.
I heard you exterminated Undying Diligence. I'm very curious how you managed to kill that bastard.
The unicorn revealed its teeth in a sinister smile. So you better hurry up and show your true strength.
It lowered its head, pointing its horn forward. Otherwise,
it then flew into the air before descending like a bolt of lightning, as if to skewer Sol Jihu to death.
Sol Jihu gasped inwardly and subconsciously threw his body forward. It would obviously catch up in an instant even if he fell backward, so he had chosen a frontal breakthrough. However, boom! With the earth behind him heaving. Behind! Flone's urgent voice rang out in his head. Sol Jihu reflexively turned his head back, and upon catching a glimpse, he was shocked speechless.
After beating the earth, the unicorn circled back in an almost fantastical display of cornering and chased after him.
Sol Jihu instantly turned his body. He planned to strike with the added power of the rotational force, but the horn burrowed in a step earlier. Iya! In an instant, along with the sensation of his belly button being pulled to one side, a scorching pain swept through his side. Yuwa! By the time he gathered his senses, his feet were already dozens of centimeters off the ground. Floan had swiftly picked Sol Jihu up by his shoulder, helping him escape the attack by a narrow margin. Phew! That was close. Who are you, bitch? Floan's eyes widened immediately after she let out a sigh of relief. It was because a furious voice rang out from above her. The unicorn had moved above her before she noticed and was now holding its forelegs up. Eeh! Along with Floan's startled yelp, nightshades shot out of the unicorn's body. Next, it strongly kicked the air. Boom! Along with a balloon-popping sound, Floan was sent flying without being able to utter a single cry. Noticing that she was a ghost, the unicorn had made the most effective attack. Sol Jihu's complexion turned dark as he abruptly found himself flying. Agnes hurriedly shot a wide net of threads in an attempt to restrict the unicorn, but it shook off the net with only a light jerk. Die! Then, it fiercely charged toward Sol Jihu. It was then. Quang! A heat wave crashed down on the unicorn. The blaze was large enough to cover the 4th Army commander's bulky physique. With that, Philip Muller shot one spell after the other. Only then did Sol Jihu land on the ground. Although he hurriedly picked himself back up, the unicorn easily broke through the fire net, refusing to give him a moment of rest. The 4th Army commander did not seem to be hurt in the slightest. On closer inspection, a blue, dome-shaped layer was protecting its body. A bunch of insects. With a snort, the unicorn released nightshades once again. It raised its seething forelegs with the haze. Then, just as it was about to chase the desperately fleeing Sol Jihu and strike down, it suddenly stopped its pursuit and fell backward. Immediately afterward, dozens of green sword chi swept through the area it was previously standing on like a tidal wave. A woman adorning a fluttering white traditional robe, Baek Haiju, landed in front of Sol Jihu. "What are you doing, stupid?" As soon as she came down, she yelled angrily, opening lips that were dripping with blood. "We have the least amount of information on him. That's why we planned to probe him out first." "Why the heck did you rush in? You don't know anything." Sol Jihu looked dazed. He had a reason for rushing in. It was to attract the unicorn's attention since it was aiming for Phi Sora, who fell into a groggy state. However, Sol Jihu wasn't in any mind to give a proper answer. He had exchanged several attacks in this short period of time. No, it was embarrassing to even call it an exchange of attacks. In reality, he was the only one receiving them. Although it was only the first time they were clashing, he felt like he got through 3 or 4 life or death hurdles. It's even stronger than undying diligence. That's obvious. Baek Haiju said angrily while keeping her eye on the grinning unicorn lifting its head proudly. That fight against undying diligence started with my sneak attack successfully detonating his heart. Your second sneak attack also succeeded and dealt a considerable amount of damage to him. But that guy's different. He was waiting for us fully prepared. Do you think our current situation is in any way comparable to back then? In truth, Sol Jihu didn't remember much of what happened during the Valley War. But remembering Baek Haiju's spear piercing the 1st Army commander as he was about to kill him, Sol Jihu nodded in agreement unwittingly. Looking back, that was indeed the case. He had exchanged a few moves with undying diligence before ultimately being knocked down. However, that was only because undying diligence was going easy. The 1st Army commander had toyed with him with one finger, wanting to see the power of an anti-evil energy user.
However, the Fourth Army commander was different. Rather than going easy or being relaxed, it was using its full power from the start, wanting to thoroughly squash them early.
Now that we're here, don't think everyone can make it back alive,
Baek Haiju muttered in a cold voice.
Understanding what she meant, Sol Ji-hoo clenched his teeth. She was telling him not to interfere unnecessarily as he did before. Even if Phi Sora would be killed miserably, the rest of the team would profit if they could gather information on Raging Temperance.
As the unicorn started to show signs of starting round 2, Baek Haiju wiped the blood on her lips and shouted, "We have no choice now that it's come to this." It was at that moment. Listen to me carefully. Sol Ji-hoo flinched. Baek Haiju's voice had suddenly resounded in his head. Don't react to what I'm saying. Don't show it. Don't reveal anything that might give it away. Baek Haiju seemed to have an ability similar to mental transmission, which directly transferred one's thoughts to someone's head.
This was clearly so that the Fourth Army commander couldn't eavesdrop on their conversation.
You and I need to take the lead, surround that bastard from all sides, and pummel him to death. That monster has a fearsome speed and instantaneous destructive power, but his defense must be subpar, judging by the way he bothers to avoid or block attacks.
Just like when we killed Undying Diligence. Just one chance is enough.
The voice being transmitted to his head carried a slightly different tone than what she was saying out loud. During the Valley War, Baek Haiju had witnessed Sol Ji-hoo awakened by the future vision overwhelming the 3 army commanders, not just in sheer power alone but also in wits and guile.
She was planning to use a similar deceitful strategy. But in reality, Sol Ji-hoo had no memories of himself from back then. "Huh? Do you think I permit any sneak attacks?" Raging Temperance had a dumbfounded expression.
Baek Haiju did a double take, then hurriedly lowered her voice in a whisper.
"Then I'll go in first and create an opening.
Wait for that moment, got it?" Though she was whispering, anyone would be able to hear her if they strained their ears.
"Other people will create an opening. You and I can't miss that chance. Do you remember how we pincered Undying Diligence?" Of course, what she transmitted to his head was completely different. "You lot? No, you were nothing but lowly insects from the first place. Fine. Struggle to your heart's content." The unicorn shook its head.
By the looks of it, it was thinking that winning wasn't a problem as long as it didn't let its guard down. It seems even the Supreme Queen has unfounded worries from time to time. Calling such imbeciles top-ranking experts. Tisk, tisk. I'd rather get this over with and shake my hips. Muttering disappointedly, it scratched the ground. The earth turned hollow around its legs as a cloud of dirt scattered in the air. It put on an intimidating air. He's coming. Baek Haiju stood in position. Sol Ji-hoo nodded silently. Now that he took a look at his surroundings, the warriors who spread out were slowly inching closer to the unicorn from all sides. They each had a grave expression on their face as if they were willing to become a meat shield. When he charges at one of us, don't force yourself to make a move. The Star of Avarice will start first. Sol Ji-hoo questioned her message. He was expecting the warriors to charge in, but the magician was starting the fight? That was unexpected. He used manifestation immediately after he teleported. If it wasn't for you charging in on your own, he would have finished it earlier without having to stop in the middle. The moment Sol Ji-hoo heard these words, he felt a boundless energy simultaneously rising up from the distance. The avaricious energy spread far and wide, instantly seizing the land. This energy, a presence transcending a human being, manifested. Not even the powerful army commander could look down upon this presence. The unicorn turned to the side, where a magician was standing with an open book in his hand. Philip Muller looked feeble, as if a gust of wind would blow him away. He was sweating so profusely that not only his hair, but also his thick robe was drenched. Small veins had broken out above his eyes' sclera, and his facial muscles were visibly convulsing. And above him, a faint silhouette could be seen of a long-haired person, joining their two hands in prayer. "Oh!" The unenthused Raging Temperance suddenly gave a look of interest.
"Ho! Ho!
Is that truly you, Avarisha?" At that moment, Philip Muller raised his shaky hand and lifted the book to the sky.
Avar.
Splitting opening his already widened eyes even more.
Ava.
He spat out the spell he had been suppressing with a huge breath.
Avarisha.
In the next moment, two hands of a goddess, physically manifesting above Philip Muller, dropped down and spread their palms toward the unicorn.
Chapter 325. Zung.
A deafening sound rang in his ears.
It was a noise that Sol Jihu had never heard before in his life and something that was hard to describe with words.
Its effect was immediate. The
unicorn's four limbs were twisted all of a sudden, causing it to collapse on the ground. Raging Temperance finally showed signs of urgency. Kaya. It let out a short groan while its body lightly swayed.
It looked as if it was being subjected to a tremendous amount of gravity.
You!
At that moment, a third of the flock of nightshades that it had previously released could be seen being absorbed back into it.
Raging Temperance managed to steady himself. Ha ha! Hee hee huh! It let out a suppressed laugh while sweating. I was wondering what you were up to, but it was only a curse of the 7 sins?
You expended so much effort to manifest yourself here. Yet you only managed to limit my abilities? Avarisha did not reply. She only sent a mocking glare towards it, cold enough to make everyone in the area feel its chill.
Truly laughable, Avarisha.
Though the unicorn laughed with great arrogance, anyone could see that it was forced laughter to mask its bluff.
In other words, Raging Temperance himself was telling them that the curse was effective.
HMPH. It doesn't matter. Even if I can't do anything about the authority, I can just recover the divinity I've lost.
Following that, another third of the nightshades around the unicorn were absorbed. Good. The movement speed of that perverted unicorn should have significantly dropped now.
Sol Jihu could hear Baek Haiju's mental transmission. His eyes widened when he found out the nature of the curse. There was one reason that the 4th Army commander could toy with their expedition team after their first clash, and that was its otherworldly movement speed that could not be followed by human senses.
However, a limit was now placed on its mind-blowing speed.
In other words, the power of the 4th Army commander was greatly weakened. Of course, while it might still have abilities that it had yet to expose, things were undeniably looking better for the expedition team.
The Wacko Archer will make an opening for us.
Wacko Archer? When she does, launch a surprise attack with your Spear of Purity.
There's no need to injure it. It'll be enough if you can just make it retreat. She continued saying things he didn't understand.
The spear you're holding in your hands is an incredible treasure. It might even be a stronger divine weapon than my Tathagata spear. Sol Jihu subconsciously clenched onto his Spear of Purity after glancing at the green spear Baek Haiju was holding. It doesn't look like you can draw out its true power, but I'm sure of it. The unicorn looked like he was desperately trying to avoid that spear of yours.
You should be able to make him retreat with it.
Sol Jihu nodded his head.
A moment later, his comrades started to move. When the archers started shooting, signaling the start of their plan, the warriors who had sneakily surrounded the unicorn charged towards it all at once. Tisk tisk. The unicorn remained nonchalant, mocking them to try as they would. Instead of retreating, it waited for them to come near before easily sending Cho Hong, who charged at it while under her manifestation ability, flying using its horn. Valhalla. With its hind legs, it violently kicked up Hugo, who was aiming for its back, and reared in response to O Rahi, who was rushing toward it at a frightening speed. It bent its forelegs in a 90 degrees angle in preparation to stamp her into mush.
It was at that moment.
Hup! When the Fourth Army commander reared,
a shadow suddenly materialized behind its back. With one arm tightly wrapped around the unicorn's neck and two legs strapped across its body, it was none other than Hoshino Urara.
Sol Jihu finally realized who the wacko archer was referring to.
Hoshino-style secret ultimate move. Ura charge. Shouting that, she slid the katana she was holding in her left hand down the unicorn's neck.
Or rather, she tried to.
Just when she was about to stab down, the unicorn glanced at Hoshino Urara, who was mounted on its back before violently shaking its body.
Yui!
As the unicorn desperately began to struggle to shake her off, Hoshino Urara became a flag fluttering in a storm.
It was struggling so violently that Rahi couldn't easily approach it anymore. Ack! Hoshino Urara, who was thrown off in the end, gaped open her mouth. It was because the unicorn stomped its hoof down on her shoulder. Unk! The pain of muscles tearing and bones breaking swept over her.
No matter how much Hoshino Urara tried to endure it, she couldn't help letting out a suppressed moan.
Hoo-hoo!
A perfect ending for an insect like you.
Eek! Ehu! Yook! Ung! Just scream, won't you? Ha 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 ha!
The unicorn ridiculed her to his heart's content as he watched the greatly distressed woman. However, the unicorn's face gradually became sour the more Hoshino Urara was in pain.
She definitely was in agony. She was, but… Tetik. Tetititi. Take. Quote ellipsis quote. Listening to her began to disgust the unicorn.
It somehow began to get ticked off looking at her scrunching her face up like a ho-ho mask and letting out strange noises through a puckered mouth.
It almost felt like it was being teased. No, it was sure she was ridiculing it. This fucking bitch.
The unicorn suddenly grew angered for no reason and raised its forelegs again.
I'll crush that foul mouth of yours. And as it was slamming its legs down,
Teta?
Hoshino Urara suddenly opened one eye.
As soon as she saw the frustrated and pissed off horsehead, she immediately looked towards her left and shouted at the top of her voice.
Do it now. Right now.
What? The horsehead urgently swung to the side. Quote?
But there was nothing. It couldn't find anything that would pose a threat. Just kidding.
Hoshino Urara grinned before grabbing her shattered shoulder and rolling away.
When the unicorn saw Hoshino Urara again. Save me. She was already running away after freeing herself from under it. Silver threads shot towards her from afar as if Agnes were trying to help the injured girl. This.
The angered unicorn crouched down. It meant to chase after the insect that gave him humiliation before the fast-approaching threads snatched her from its grasp. That was what it tried to do, but…
The unicorn suddenly froze in place, right as it was about to kick off the ground. It suddenly felt a mighty surge of holy fluctuations from its right. When it quickly turned its head around, it could see Baek Haiju in a stance, gathering energy. Damn it!
It occurred to the unicorn at that moment that it was forgetting the two beings it should have been wary of.
The unicorn furiously ground its teeth but still turned to face Baek Haiju before retreating several steps away from her.
That was why it couldn't see it. The threads that Agnes had released brushed past Hoshino Urara and were flying straight toward it in the direction it was retreating in.
It wasn't even aware of the incoming attack.
This was because Raging Temperance's attention was not only on Baek Haiju but also on Sol Jihu, who launched a surprise attack according to Baek Haiju's mental transmissions. You treacherous bastards!
The unicorn grit its teeth.
It was actually fuming inside because it had been deceived. But on the other hand, it also felt that they were laughable, thinking that their attempted ambush was all they had been aiming for.
Only, it couldn't ignore the divine spear overflowing with sword chi imbued with the anti-evil attribute, so it quickly backed away. Even though its movement speed was restricted under the curse of the 7 deadly sins, It wasn't an idiot that would let itself get hit by obvious attacks.
Sock. The diagonal spear strike narrowly swished past its snout.
The unicorn snorted, seeing Sol Jihu's body passing by in front of its eyes.
Determined to launch its counterattack this time, it powerfully struck the ground with its legs.
And the moment when its 4 hooves were firmly planted on the ground. Spider webs stealthily appeared out of nowhere and tightly bound its limbs.
Immediately following that, a wave of sacred light swept down the lines and dyed all the threads in a pale white color.
Hot!
Agnes flung her hands apart with a loud shout, causing the legs of the unicorn that was bound unawares to be forcibly spread apart in the air.
Trifling actions.
But the unicorn soon became astonished after it tried twisting its body. What?
Normally, the threads should have burst all at once.
However, the situation was completely different from before. Tuck, 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 tuck. A few threads were still breaking, but the rate of them being cut down was noticeably slower. The threads maintained their tension while the white light they were dyed with was preventing the threads from breaking.
Just how?
The unicorn panicked and turned its horse head around before discovering the cause. Xiao Yuhui, the star of lust and the apostle of luxuria, was transmitting holy power to Agnes by placing her hands on her back.
And
Sol Jihu, who had brushed past the unicorn, suddenly turned around and powerfully kicked the ground. He rushed like a charging tiger at the unicorn that was helplessly stuck in midair, unable to move an inch. It was the perfect chance. Perhaps because he was aware that he couldn't miss this opportunity, his mana circuit started burning a level hotter. He accurately thrust his spear towards Raging Temperance, who was caught in an unexpected situation. The spear of purity exploded out with a golden light, far more vivid than ever, and arrived at the unicorn's long neck. At that instant,
Kong! Blue sparks erupted out amidst golden arcs of electricity.
Sol Jihu, who thought everything was finally over, had his face grow blank.
The spear couldn't pierce through its neck.
To be precise, the spear was stopped before it could even touch the unicorn's neck.
Taking a closer look, he could see a bluish film of light covering its body.
It was that barrier that had protected it from Philip Muller's magic once. While it wasn't in the shape of a hemisphere like that time, a barrier was definitely covering its body. The unicorn must have instinctively activated it at the moment it received the unexpected attack. The barrier seemed to be caving in bit by bit, but it looked like it wouldn't be pierced through in a matter of seconds.
It was a hard opportunity to come by. To retreat or not to retreat. All sorts of thoughts flashed in his mind.
Sol Jihu and the unicorn exchanged dazed glances for a second before the unicorn opened its mouth and revealed its protruding teeth.
Ha! Duke.
The threads restraining its right leg were ripped apart.
Die! It screamed while striking down its right hoof at Sol Jihu's head. Eat!
However, its blow missed by a hair's breadth just as it was about to crush Sol Jihu's head.
It was because a dark smoke suddenly flew towards its leg and caused it to change its trajectory.
What's it this time? The unicorn's face scrunched up when it found a female ghost desperately clinging onto its leg. At that moment, Sol Jihu's eyes started to shine. He clenched his teeth and put more strength into driving in the spear with his hands. As he did so, the spear of purity began emitting electricity and started to vibrate.
Damn it!
Feeling the imminent danger, the unicorn ignored Floan and hastily broke the threads around its left leg. Once freed, it kicked it towards Sol Jihu, who was giving it his all. However, instead of the sound of a head bursting, the sound of metal clashing rang out. The unicorn focused its eyes on the shield, which was glowing white from having received Xiao Yuhui's holy power, that suddenly slipped in from the side out of the blue and blocked the blow.
Kiu. The moan was let out by none other than Phi Sora.
She had re-entered the fight after having been knocked unconscious when she received a heavy blow early on before recovering a little, thanks to Maria's treatment. Despite the blood dripping down her nose, Phi Sora managed to raise her long sword.
When her blade became wrapped in flames, she slammed it towards the spear of purity with all her might. A clear metallic ring echoed out as sparks flew. "Pierce through. Please pierce through ugh. Kong! Kong!" She let out a yell and crazily swung down her long sword multiple times.
And because of the added force, the spear of purity really did start to advance bit by bit.
You fucking bitch."
The appalled unicorn repeatedly kicked with its leg, but Phi Sora fiercely held onto her shield that was strengthened by holy power.
She tenaciously resisted the blows and kept swinging her arm while leaning against Sol Jihu.
And when the flaming sword struck down another time on the spear of purity, a blood-red long sword stuck against it at a terrifying speed and stacked on top of the two weapons.
"Hold your shield properly. You dumb bitch."
Oh, Rahi shouted while pressing her blade down with both hands.
"You ah." Chohong's thorn of steel also struck down on top of the pile.
"For Valhalla." And the moment Hugo rushed to them to heavily swing the halberd which he had been carrying on his shoulders.
Chung! A jarring noise like that of glass cracking rang in their ears.
Sol Jihu's eyes suddenly widened. Beneath the spear of purity, pinned underneath 4 other weapons, was a small gap on the blue barrier. It was a very tiny gap, but it was a crack nonetheless.
Koo! Sol Jihu clenched the spear shaft as he gritted his teeth.
His internal circuits were already so hot that they were almost on the verge of melting and his mana was raging inside of him like a storm. Despite this, Sol Jihu scraped up all the energy left in his body and focused everything he had at the spearhead.
You ah! And a second later, Sol Jihu could clearly feel it.
The barrier, which had persistently endured up till now, cracked, and the sensation of what felt like his spear lightly piercing through a solid log was transmitted up his hands.
Ah!
Sol Jihu's mouth gaped open.
It wasn't his imagination or a hallucination.
The spear of purity was sticking out of the unicorn's body. It had finally broken through the barrier.
Sol Jihu yelled at the top of his voice through his opened mouth. Baek Haiju SSI.
At the same moment, Baek Haiju's figure quickly narrowed the distance between them. As she calmly stretched out her arm, all the aura that had been flaring out about her, spilled into her spear.
When she was done, the aura gathered at the tip of her spear and condensed into a point that was smaller than the fingernail of a baby's pinky. And then,
Baek Haiju's Tathagata spear brushed past all the weapons, squeezed through the gap made by the spear of purity, and finally pierced into the body of raging temperance.
Ook! Boom! With the sound of something exploding inside it, the unicorn's body inflated like a pig. When it swelled until it looked like it was about to explode, a green aura began spilling out of its body like meat juice oozing out of a steak. It was only then that Baek Haiju replied to Sol Jihu's call for her. Jihu! In the next moment, holy water flowed out from her body like river water bursting through a dam, while an overwhelming lightning energy poured out like thunder from Sol Jihu's. The two auras began to fuse together as if they were rubbing against each other before they completely harmonized in a perfect union. Chapter 326.
As the green energy began to seep into the unicorn's outer skin, Sol Jihu pushed his spear in deeper while rousing the power of Soma. Thinking that this was the end, he exerted the anti-evil energy to the limit.
Eventually, as golden arcs of lightning crackled on the overflowing holy water. Peetst! Kia! The unicorn's mouth split open. Inside a blindingly dazzling burst of light, it shook and thrashed its body in a frantic struggle, screaming at the top of its voice. However, not a single thing went its way. Threads imbued with holy power newly flew in and bound the unicorn's forelegs again.
As a result, the unicorn became frozen in place with its forelegs and hind legs spread wide, and the lightning current frolicked around in the green sea like an excited child.
Kuo. Kua.
The unicorn's squirming died down just as quickly as its screams.
Its previously grinning eyes rolled back as it clearly looked to be on the verge of losing its consciousness.
However, Sol Jihu did not drop his guard.
His comrades had exhausted their power to create this single opportunity for him.
The golden light surging around him already demonstrated that he was using the anti-evil lightning to the fullest, and he had no plans to pull his punches. And so, just as he was about to scrape up every ounce of mana in his body, risking potential damage to his mana circuit, Sol Jihu suddenly received a strange sensation. It's being pulled in? The lightning current that was running around like a playful child abruptly became orderly. Then, it suddenly stopped dancing and was sucked in one direction like a child answering its mother's call. Taken aback by this sudden phenomenon, Sol Jihu cast an upward glance.
The attack wasn't over yet.
The holy water's aura shot up like a fountain and began to take shape. It split into 26 streams, spread out like a discus, and slowly rolled up from opposite ends.
The final shape was that of a flower.
The 26 streams of holy water came together and bloomed into a lotus. Next, as it absorbed the lightning current that was flowing in, a truly wondrous golden lotus flower bloomed.
And thus, boom! As one petal exploded in a terrifying flash of light.
Kurorararararara. The unicorn that was nearing its death once again rampaged in madness. It shook its head in all directions, reeling from pain as the lotus flower exploded inside its body. Meanwhile, the petals continued to explode one by one, raising a storm with extraordinary explosions.
Seeing this, Sol Jihu narrowed his eyes.
The light from the explosions was so intense that it was dyeing his vision white. Due to its fierce intensity, Sol Jihu worried he might lose his sight.
Even the threads imbued with holy power were about to melt like wax under the sun. Glancing to the side, Sol Jihu saw Baek Haiju glaring fiercely with her hands pressed together. She was in deep concentration, sweating profusely with her mouth firmly shut. Sol Jihu also clenched his teeth and gripped the spear of purity. Once the 26 petals of the lotus flower all bloomed, the periodic explosions halted.
Immediately afterward, the swaying horsehead stood erect.
Kiu!
With heavy pants, Raging Temperance's eyes lit up. Baek Haiju quickly shouted,
"Get back!"
In the next moment, the 6 warriors who rushed in, including Baek Haiju and Sol Jihu, fell back simultaneously. At the same time, the unicorn raised its forelegs and began to stomp down crazily.
Boom, 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 boom. Even after taking dozens of steps backward, intense vibrations could be felt under their feet. Although the unicorn was attacking blindly without a clear target, it was still incredibly powerful.
He still has so much energy.
No. When Chohong sighed with an exhausted look, Baek Haiju shook her head in denial. A candle burns the brightest right before going out. Hearing the calmness in her voice, everyone gazed at Raging Temperance. After finishing its short final struggle, the unicorn was left in a sorry state that was hard to watch. Its bulky body had cracked up and was now looking grotesque like a deflated balloon. Its beautiful white hair had burned to a crisp, exposing a barren hill, and the way parts of its body were stained black. Pus mixed with blood must have flowed out before being cooked by the flames. Uwuk, kawak, kawak. It even started to dry heave while dragging its 4 legs. It was easy to see that it wasn't in the best condition. The expedition team's killer move had done its job. Next, as if to prove this conjecture, the unicorn's legs buckled and it plopped down. Chohong's complexion brightened. Is it dead? Ah! Shut up. Take what you said back right now. Hoshino Urara threw a fit as soon as Chohong asked.
Don't you dare plant such a shitty death flag. What?
Come on. If you say something like that, this bastard is gonna come back to life, saying something like, you ha ha ha. Not bad for a bunch of humans. I will show you my true power now.
Don't you watch movies?
Hearing this, everyone shut up.
They knew she was joking, but a part of them couldn't help agreeing with Hoshino Urara. There's no way he's dead yet. Baek Haiju sighed while watching the vomiting unicorn. Each parasite army commander was bestowed with the power of a god and cannot be looked down on. Even if we get lucky and force them to the verge of death, they can always use divine manifestation as a last resort.
Oh right. Hugo did a double take and asked in fright. Then shouldn't we hurry and finish it off?
Before he uses that divine manifestation thing.
No.
However, Baek Haiju shook her head once again.
Each army commander had a different degree of success in absorbing the divinity they were given. The more they failed to digest, the bigger the surge of power is when they release it.
We have to be wary of being swept away by this terrifying storm.
I can't remember how many Earthlings died like this. Hearing this, the vomiting unicorn flinched.
The way its burned, scar-filled face contorted, it must have been planning on doing this.
You cowardly little bitch. It tried to stagger up, but ultimately fell back down. Hugo shouted again.
Then what do we do?
Just wait.
For now, save every last breath you can. Baek Haiju spoke firmly as if she couldn't be bothered to explain more.
It just so happened that Sol Jihu expended his full power in the previous attack. He didn't mind taking a short break. Feeling like the inside of his body was completely empty, he quickly collected his breath.
Soon, a voice rang out in his head. As you can see, it's almost over.
All we need to do is force Raging Temperance to release its divinity and then escape.
Everyone's gaze fell on Baek Haiju at her unexpected words. Hugo was about to insensitively inquire, but Rahi quickly kicked his shin and shut him up. The army commanders don't have their divinities sealed for nothing. Each individual of each race has a clear limit as a vessel. In the first place, it is extremely difficult and rare for a mortal to fully absorb the power of an immortal. As Baek Haiju said, an army commander did not release their divinity unless it was absolutely necessary.
Although each army commander was different, they could only last 10 to 30 minutes once they used divine manifestation.
Once that time passed, they would need anywhere from several months to a whole year to replenish their strength and recover. Meaning, divine manifestation was an extremely inefficient skill that was only used as a last resort. But once they fully release their divinity, their strength will truly be on par with a god. Without an expedition team full of level 7s or a defensive measure rivaling Tiggle Fortress at its prime, facing an army commander in that state is no different than suicide. Instead, we have to run. But this also means that we only have to wait out this time. Moreover, releasing divinity in a healthy state is totally different from releasing divinity with such injuries. In the latter case, they won't be able to sustain the divinity for as long. Plus, given that Raging Temperance has the word raging in its name, there's a good chance that it will lose its mind. Sol Jihu nodded. Baek Haiju was saying they should wait until the unicorn released its divinity before scattering and running away, then coming back to finish it off once it ran out of time. Although the enemy might curse them for being cowardly, there couldn't be a better method for them. With Philip Muller's teleport around, their victory was practically guaranteed. Of course, the unicorn might, in a fit of rage, choose one or two targets to chase down, but Sol Jihu shook off this worry. He wasn't in any position to be nitpicking every possibility. Sol Jihu looked at Baek Haiju, who was calmly taking in deep breaths. He couldn't hide his surprise. It wasn't a lie that she had the most experience out of any Earthlings. The tide of battle had turned with a single attack, just like she planned. Accurately identifying the enemy's weakness in such a short exchange and giving an effective solution. Admiring this ability of hers, Sol Jihu steeled his resolve.
Let's just do whatever Miss Baek Haiju says. Coo! Coo! The unicorn glared at the expedition team while panting heavily.
It should have released its divinity by this point, but it must be hesitating because it realized Baek Haiju's plan. It only scratched the poor, blameless earth with its foreleg, stalling for time.
Seeing this, even if it's dangerous to get near him, it should be fine to attack him from afar, no? Marcel Guionia aimed his crossbow. Drrrk. Once he shot his bolts, the remaining members joined in.
Having recovered a small amount of mana, Sol Jihu formed several mana spears and threw them as well. He knew such attacks wouldn't be enough to bring it down. It was only a show to force it to hurry up and release its divinity. The attacks must still be threatening due to the gravity of its injuries as the unicorn hurriedly stepped back. However, it fell back down a moment later and was forced to curl its body like a bullied kid trying to protect himself from rocks. Before anyone noticed, its body had gotten smaller.
It was in a pitiful state compared to how proud it was initially.
Come on. Hurry up and release your divinity. You know you have to.
Let's see what you're made of.
The expedition team began to mock the unicorn as they continually sent one mana-infused attack after the other.
Hiu! Hiu!
How can I? How can I?
In response, the helplessly cowering unicorn raised its head.
Gritting its teeth loudly, a bitter hesitation flashed on its face.
Thwack! Uk.
But after being hit by Sol Jihu's mana spear, it could no longer bear it and finally spoke.
Damn it.
H.
Help me.
Sol Jihu doubted his ears. What did it just say? Why are you just watching?
Didn't you say the queen personally ordered you to come?
It was then.
How embarrassing.
A quiet, silvery voice resounded. Sol Jihu, who was about to throw another mana spear, unwittingly paused.
He wasn't the only one.
Each member of the expedition team stopped moving and froze like statues.
It wasn't just because they heard a mysterious voice out of nowhere. It was more so because of a frightening presence that suddenly swallowed the area wholly. I was half doubtful, but alas, the queen's worry was not unfounded. Sol Jihu looked up in a daze. A figure with twin horns on its head and a long tail stretching out from its butt was floating in the air and proudly looking down on the ground. To be more precise, it was glaring at the unicorn, not the expedition team. Since when? Sol Jihu couldn't detect it at all. This also meant no one else noticed this existence, not even Baek Haiju. Who was the one who told me not to butt in? Didn't you say you would take care of them alone? That's. As the reptilian pupils of its bright, yellow eyes slit vertically, the unicorn furtively lowered its gaze and turned its head. Ha! I thought you were a fool who only knew how to be arrogant. Now that your life is in danger, you're quick to sell off the little bit of pride you have left. What an embarrassment. Hearing the stern rebuke, the unicorn's face contorted with shame and humiliation. Its frustration was easy to see. The newly emerged existence snorted, then pushed up its ivory-colored hair that flowed down like a waterfall. On the other hand, the expedition team was in a state of confusion. No one could open their mouths because of the strange goosebumps they were getting. This being's presence was bigger than that of any other existence they had met. They could even feel a boundless, inestimable aura. This immense power was a cut above even Ricel La Grazia and Raging Temperance. At last, as their eyes met, "Run!" Baek Haiju, who had maintained her cool until now, surprisingly yelled out loud. Then, she launched herself like a flying tiger. Sensing an abnormal flow of air, Sol Jihu flinched. At the same time that a cool breeze blew past his neck, someone reached toward Sol Jihu from the sky. Ack! He let out a yelp in the next moment. Looking back reflexively, he saw Baek Haiju with her arm raised.
Her hand was in the shape of a blade, as though she was planning to strike down on his neck.
The problem was that she was standing stiff and doing nothing.
She was trembling faintly in an awkward position, as if something was binding her and preventing her from moving, knocking him out and escaping with him against his will.
I applaud your quick thinking.
Before Sol Ji-hoo could figure out what happened, the figure in the air continued speaking. But since I've received an order, I can't just let him go. Now that you've come all the way here, you'll have to stay for a little bit.
The figure clenched its open palm. Kaya-iu. Baek Haiju's grunt became louder. Her arms and the rest of her body began to slowly shrink.
Once she barely managed to shake her arm with a heavy frown, the Tathagata spear spun while emitting a green light. That must have freed her as she spat out the breath she had been holding in. However, the grimace on her face did not disappear.
Oh ho! As expected of someone whose name is well known to even the army commanders.
The existence in the air looked slightly surprised.
It retracted the hand it was reaching out with and dusted it off.
Its expression was that of amusement and praise.
Number way.
At that moment, Philip Muller, who was staring with a stunned face, finally opened his mouth. His doubt seemed to become reality after seeing the existence using only one hand to toy with Baek Haiju.
No way, no way.
His voice quivered out as he failed to even form a proper sentence.
He seemed to be rejecting reality, or at least praying it was false.
After a silence that seemed to last for eternity, Philip Muller spat out the words in his mind.
The 7th Army Commander. Twisted Kindness. 1. Although he stammered, the absolute silence in the surroundings helped his words get heard.
The complexions of the expedition team members turned pale. While not much was known about the 7th Army Commander, they had certainly heard some things about her. She was the last dragon remaining in paradise, the only army commander to have fully absorbed her divinity, and the only army commander that did not lead an army. Standing in front of her presence, they now realized that rumors about her were not exaggerated in any way. Their initial reaction to her description was a nonchalant, "I can see that being a thing." But now, they fully sensed how absurdly powerful this existence was. It was the same for Sol Ji-hoo. Though they considered a second army commander being in the spirit realm, now that he was facing Twisted Kindness face to face, an indescribable sense of despair swept through his body. Going through great difficulties to find the spring and breaking through the astral world to arrive at the spirit realm, they had expended a great amount of effort and were on the cusp of neutralizing raging temperance. But the light of hope that was in their grasp had suddenly flickered off.
Let's see. Which one of you is?
And it was all because of the appearance of Twisted Kindness, the strongest of the 7 commanders, who even the first army commander, Undying Diligence, was said to be helpless against. 1. So it turns out Twisted Kindness is female, not male, as I previously thought. I will be making that change going forward. Chapter 327. You-ha-ha-ha. Yes. That's it. That's the face I wanted to see. The unicorn that was on the verge of death guffawed jubilantly. Like a donkey in a lion's skin, it borrowed the true commander's power to hold its head high. However, the unicorn's laughter didn't last long. For a simple reason. Good. Twisted Kindness. Teach these treacherous, impertinent ints. Thwack. It was sent flying in the middle of his diatribe and made to tumble on the ground in an unsightly fashion, not by anyone from the expedition team, but by his fellow army commander, Twisted Kindness. She attacked him? Sol Ji-hoo doubted his eyes. Raging temperance snapped out of its daze and also stared dumbfoundedly. What is the meaning of this? Shut it. A cold voice cut him off. When Twisted Kindness looked down with a chilling gaze, the unicorn quickly shrunk back. A weakling like you dares to order me around? Damn it. I'm not ordering you. I was talking as a fellow ally, who also serves the queen. Ally? Twisted Kindness raised her eye.
She looked as though she just heard the funniest joke of the century. You.
Gazing at raging Temperance, she broke out into laughter.
It doesn't look like you have the slightest clue why the Queen threw you in here.
What?
How ridiculous.
You actually have the galls to say that in your sorry state? Your actions are riddled with self-righteousness and egotism, so how can you shamelessly call yourself an ally?
You damned lizard. I came here to conquer this realm under the Queen's order. Foo-foo. I don't care if you hurt your mouth, but talk properly. I'm the one who invaded and conquered the spirit realm, not you. Do you realize how laughable those words are when all you've done is clean up remnants of the enemy? Kook! The unicorn shut its mouth. Its face turned purple with rage, but it couldn't find the words to retort with.
That's not all.
If you'd acknowledged your limits and formed a proper army as the Queen suggested, I would have acknowledged you as an ally. But Twisted Kindness paused for a moment, looked back and forth between the expedition team and the unicorn, then snorted. You tried to imitate me and ended up ripping your crotch.
That is why you are in such a pathetic state, O insignificant creature of the spiritual dimension. With
such an obvious weakness, don't you feel ashamed calling yourself an army commander? Twisted Kindness clicked her tongue and shook her head. The Queen is keeping you by her side only because she thinks highly of your experimental mind. Otherwise, she would have replaced you long ago.
Have some shame. The unicorn lowered its head at the continued barrage of criticisms. Rather than agreeing and self-reflecting on them, it was very obviously wrought in a sense of inferiority.
Twisted Kindness shook her head as if she didn't have any expectations in the first place.
Anyway, the spirit realm is now within my jurisdiction. Don't butt in without my permission. No, maybe it wouldn't be bad if you did. That way, I'd finally have a reason to execute you.
After threatening the panting unicorn, Twisted Kindness threw her gaze to the side. The expedition team was quietly watching the two army commanders. Running away was obviously impossible.
They didn't say a single word, tired from the recent short but fierce battle. Now that Twisted Kindness had made her appearance, they knew fighting would be the same as hitting a rock with an egg. But they had no intention of giving up so easily. To recover the strength to fight, each breath was of utmost importance. When their eyes met the formidable enemy in front of them, the tension they were feeling multiplied by at least a dozen times. However, to their surprise, Twisted Kindness did not immediately make a move.
She stared at the expedition team while tilting her head.
You all don't look so good.
Then, she suddenly descended and sat down on the ground.
What was she doing sitting rather than fighting? Everyone held their breaths at the enemy's unexpected action. Rest. A bombshell dropped in the next moment. No, her tone was too calm to call it a bombshell, but it certainly shook the expedition team with shock. What did you say?
Even the unicorn that was keeping its mouth shut after Twisted Kindness' intimidation, spoke up in shock.
Our rest?
Did you finally go CRA? Ak! A scream burst out before it could even finish speaking. Twisted Kindness had waved her hand as though she was too lazy to deal with it, and the unicorn's stomach exploded and spilled out internal organs. Why you? The unicorn screamed in indignation, but quickly fell silent upon seeing Twisted Kindness' hand moving slightly. What a shame. If only you uttered another word, I could have killed you once and for all. It seemed she wasn't kidding when she said she would execute him. The unicorn slammed its head on the ground and gritted its teeth viciously. While this would normally be a comedic scene that would make its audience burst out in a peal of laughter, no one found it funny with Twisted Kindness being the host of the show. They could feel a sense of absolute authority from her words, the kind that would let her get away with saying or doing whatever she wished. Was this the majesty of an absolute being? Now that I think about it. Twisted Kindness ignored the groaning unicorn thoroughly and said as she stared at the expedition team. You humans were a cumbersome species that required various sustenance in order to live. It is fine. Rest.
During this time, you can eat or even sleep." Saying so, Twisted Kindness raised her left knee and placed her hand on it. "Do not worry. As long as you do not try to leave my view, I will not touch a hair on your body until you fully recover. I vow on my name and the dragon god's honor."
Sol Jihu and the remaining members of the expedition team all furrowed their brows.
Perhaps feeling their collective gaze, Twisted Kindness tilted her head back in laughter.
"I'm telling you to eat, sleep, and recover and fight me when you're fully prepared." With that, she raised her hands outward in a shrug.
"Since I came all the way here, why can't I enjoy myself a bit? With some of you looking like you're on your last leg, I won't be able to brag even if I annihilate you all." In a way, this boldness of hers showed her faith in her own abilities. Perhaps it was the graciousness of an expert who could not find her match for a long time. Thinking about it this way, her action wasn't entirely nonsensical. It was just that. "What will you do?"
"I don't mind fighting you now if that is what you want."
Sol Jihu almost ended up nodding.
Twisted Kindness' offer was without a doubt beneficial to the expedition team.
But the reason he hesitated to accept it was because of an indescribable restlessness he was feeling inside.
Sol Jihu, who was paying close attention to the current situation, felt a sense of incongruity from her words.
Though he could certainly say the enemy was showing kindness, it somehow felt warped and distorted. Rather than doing them a favor, it looked like she was aiming for something else.
"I don't get it."
Racking his brain and hesitating, Sol Jihu's eyes suddenly narrowed. "What is it?"
He couldn't figure out Twisted Kindness' true intention, if there even was one.
But seeing the furtive expectation in her joyous pupils, he made up his mind.
To fight. He wasn't sure whether this was the right choice.
It could very well be that Twisted Kindness was truly giving them a chance. But he had a strong feeling that something would be too late once he accepted Twisted Kindness' offer. This ominous feeling told him, even if they achieved their goal and returned to Tiggle Fortress, everything would be over. So once he made up his mind, Sol Jihu tightened his grip on the spear of purity that was loosely being held in his hand.
Twisted Kindness' eyes lit up. "Everyone,"
knowing that they stood little chance,
"prepare for battle." Sol Jihu squeezed out his voice and gave the command. The expedition members didn't say anything. Only the sounds of their weapons being raised were heard. "Ho!" Twisted Kindness' eyes curled. She looked surprised, but did not say much and shrugged with a grin. "All right then." Standing up, she dusted her butt. "Let's see." Revealing her teeth in a grin, she beckoned them. "Come." The moment she took a step forward. Whish! A fierce gale abruptly blew forward. Appearing behind Twisted Kindness like a ghost, Rahi struck down her blood-colored longsword.
Concentrating all her energy in this movement, she had acted with a truly monstrous speed. But what was even more surprising was that Twisted Kindness dodged it simply by slightly tilting her head to the side. Not to mention, she was still looking at the rest of the expedition team. The longsword that missed its mark returned at an incredible speed, but this time, it was blocked by her arm.
Rahi's eyebrows twitched. She was using sword chi, but not even a scratch appeared on Twisted Kindness' arm. Hot! However, Rahi did not stop. Judging that a sneak attack was the only answer, she frantically swung her longsword. Her quick sword flashed at a terrifying speed. However, Twisted Kindness was unshakable. Calmly walking forward, she only moved her arm to parry or block Rahi's flurry of attacks. Rahi continued to chase Twisted Kindness while attacking her, but her expression slowly loosened in a daze. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Get lost." Twisted Kindness shooed her away as if to chase away a fly. What Rahi saw next was a long, thick tail that struck her ribs. Pook! Along with the sound of her skin bursting, Rahi's body was sent flying to the left like a bullet. Her body, arced like a bow, cut through the air like a ray of light before slamming into the ground. Her longsword also spun in the air before helplessly plunging to the ground. In the next moment, "You are Valhalla!" The members of the expedition team rushed forward simultaneously. On the other hand, Twisted Kindness walked slowly.
The contrast clearly showed the difference between the two sides' power.
At that moment, Twisted Kindness abruptly bent her knees and lowered her center of gravity.
Then, the moment she kicked off the ground, Cho-hong, who was running in the lead, widened her eyes.
A powerful gale suddenly blew against her. The moment she went,
Twisted Kindness rushed in front of her.
Pang! She didn't punch or crash into Cho-hong. The wind pressure from Twisted Kindness' charge was all it took to send Cho-hong flying while screaming. In that instant, Twisted Kindness' eyes moved in all directions.
Before a single second could go by, she spread her arms out like two lightning bolts. Hoshino, Urara and Hugo, who were about to strike down with their weapons, couldn't utter a single cry as they were knocked back.
Threads imbued with holy power flew in swiftly and stealthily using this opening, but Twisted Kindness dodged the attack by raising her leg backward in a huge motion.
At the same time, she hastily moved her tail and snatched an arrow that was about to pierce her temple from the air. Then, she threw it back using the power of only her tail.
Flying back quicker than it initially flew over, the arrow easily pierced through Seo Yuhui's urgently crafted barrier and pierced Agnes' stomach. Awk!
A sharp pain erupted.
Feeling like her stomach was being ripped out, Agnes squealed while being pushed back. It was then. While Twisted Kindness' attention was taken, Baek Haiju and Phi Sora rushed in from opposite sides. However, their sharply thrust spear and robustly swung longsword were stopped before they could reach their target. Twisted Kindness had turned instantaneously and grabbed their weapons with her hands. Her leg was still raised behind her from the previous motion as well. Ooh! Kook!
No matter how much they twisted or pulled on their weapons, they didn't budge as though they were stuck inside a boulder.
Twisted Kindness clicked her tongue. You really must be tired, Sacred Empress. She then raised her hands in an instant.
Baek Haiju and Phi Sora were pulled up alongside their weapons, headbutting each other above Twisted Kindness' head.
The two then lost their grasp over their weapons and fell to the ground while dripping down blood.
It was only then that Twisted Kindness let a breath loose and threw down the weapons in her hands. As she slowly lowered her outstretched arms with her legs still raised back like a figure skater, she looked beautiful and gracious like a goddess of war. Sol Jihu froze up following his instincts and dumbfoundedly gazed at Twisted Kindness lowering her leg.
He didn't have any other choice.
Having achieved some level of success in techniques and combat experience, he knew how amazing and mind-blowing her movements were.
He couldn't see a single superfluous movement. She had fought off several people using only the movements she needed.
To Sol Jihu, it was like seeing water of 100% clarity, devoid of any impurity and filth.
How about it? Twisted Kindness gave an alluring smile. Was that enough to demonstrate the clear difference in our abilities?
But I will admit that you have just gone through a fierce battle.
Twisted Kindness nodded her head and spoke in a soft voice that didn't suit her. If you want to rest, you can. I will wait patiently. For the record, your comrades are all alive.
She was saying she didn't kill them on purpose.
Sol Jihu's face contorted.
His reason was telling him to accept this offer, but his instincts were fiercely rejecting it.
Moreover, her pupils had been getting on his nerves since a while ago.
Her gaze was filled with a furtive expectation, despite being able to kill him at a moment's notice.
It was as if there was something she wanted to see.
Then, an inexplicable repulsion rose up from the bottom of his heart, and Sol Jihu clenched his teeth hard. As he lit up his fighting spirit, the gentle smile on Twisted Kindness' face became thicker.
Ah ha ha ha. I see. I thought it was the perfect situation to make it work, but it seems that changing the course isn't so easy.
After muttering words that were hard to understand,
Fine. She lowered her stance again. And thus, if that is the path your constellation insists on taking. The curtains were raised.
Prove to me that you have what it takes.
To the third of the four most brutal and desperate battles of Sol Jihu's life in paradise. Chapter 328. Twisted Kindness' aura changed in an instant.
The energy enshrouding her like a fog suddenly materialized and began to blaze as though a bucket of oil had been poured on top of a fire.
Sol Jihu frowned, feeling a heavy pressure crushing down on his body. Her intent was clear. She was saying she would no longer go easy on them. Sol Jihu aimed the spear of purity forward and waited for an attack. Truthfully speaking, just confronting Twisted Kindness filled him with fright.
He was very much tempted to just run away. But the moment he did such a thing, he knew that everything he had built up until now would crumble down. In the midst of despair, lacking any semblance of hope, Sol Jihu focused to get hold of himself.
How would Twisted Kindness attack?
It looked like she had a special ability other than her physical power. But then again, could he deal with her even if she used her physical power alone?
All sorts of thoughts crossed Sol Jihu's mind.
At that moment, Twisted Kindness lightly kicked off the ground.
She closed the distance between them before Sol Jihu could even blink.
But despite being astonished at her speed, Sol Jihu managed to reflexively thrust forward, having expected this to a certain degree. However, Twisted Kindness dodged the attack by turning her waist slightly and reached out with her hand like lightning.
Your first move was very disappointing.
The moment her voice reached his ears, Sol Jihu immediately ducked and dodged the hand that was trying to seize him.
And at the same time, he cut up vertically with his spear.
With the short distance between them, he figured it would be impossible to dodge this attack. He had confidence that the spear of purity would hit its mark this time. But in the next moment, Sol Jihu realized his preconceptions were all meaningless.
It was because Twisted Kindness spread her wings instantaneously and flew up. Her reaction speed was too shocking.
There is just no way Undying Diligence would have lost to this. The calm evaluation continued. As her shadow cast over Sol Jihu, he reflexively roused his mana. Electricity crackled beneath his feet. His brain sent warning signals, telling him to get far away, but he shook them off forcefully.
Now that he decided to fight, backing off was no longer an option.
He had to clash with his enemy head-on without leaving behind any spare energy.
And so, he leapt up into the air in full force and stabbed with his spear. With an explosive pang, Twisted Kindness' figure disappeared.
Sol Jihu subsequently felt something approaching from behind him.
Shoot!
Sol Jihu quickly swung the spear of purity behind him. However, Twisted Kindness worked her legs with an indifferent face, and she moved glidingly while drawing a crescent line. Just like that, she positioned herself at Sol Jihu's flank.
Sol Jihu became dazed, feeling like he was fighting a ghost. He still turned his body and reacted, but Twisted Kindness moved her arm as well.
The moment he saw her forearm, his ribs were struck with a dull pain. And by the time he felt this pain, Twisted Kindness' forearm had broken past the barrier around his ribcage and dug into it.
Kook!
In that instant, something that burst inside him almost came out of his throat through his esophagus. Sol Jihu barely swallowed it back down and tried to collect his thoughts, but before he could do anything, he was struck with another dull pain on top of his head.
Cough! Blood spurted out from his nose and mouth.
As his consciousness began to dim, Zhang Maldong's voice rang out in his head.
Get it together!
A frustrated scolding ensued. What happened to the log training you did? I told you not to hit after you see, perceive, and then think.
Hit as soon as you see it. Move using your intuition.
A true expert will land a successful attack before you can perceive it. By the time you try to move, your head would already be in the air.
It was just like he'd said. Sol Jihu couldn't see Twisted Kindness movements at all.
Since he couldn't even see it, perceiving it and thinking about it was out of the question. This meant he would have to predict her movements and move intuitively. But the enemy's movements surpassed his expectations completely.
It was the same even now.
Before he could even attempt anything, a light flashed in front of his eyes. Since a burning sensation was spreading out from his nose, it seemed he just received a good punch in the face.
Damn it, damn it.
Thinking that he couldn't just take a one-sided beating, he followed his instincts and thrust his spear indiscriminately. However, he couldn't feel a single hit connect. Even intuition was ineffective. The price of wasting his precious turns was, of course, a bitter counterattack.
He felt a sharp, stinging sensation on his neck. Although he used flash thunder and hurriedly rushed back, the impact still struck a blow to his shoulders.
Sol Ji-hoo screamed internally as he felt his clavicles break.
This. His head tilted back. He unknowingly took in a deep breath, and the foul stench of blood flowed into his nostrils.
Sol Ji-hoo's body staggered. What was driving him even crazier was that consecutive strikes came pouring in before he could even find his balance. Then, a one-sided pummeling ensued. How many times was he hit in this short instant? 10 times? 20 times? He didn't know. But if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that his senses were becoming faint.
No.
Having lost its strength at a rapid rate, his body swayed. But as he was doing a double take, he suffered yet another blow. This time, from the bottom to the top. His faltering body returned to its standing posture following his enemy's will.
It seems. A disappointed voice rang out in his ears.
This really is your true strength. Due to the pain of his internal organs buzzing, his vision became slightly clear.
And what Sol Ji-hoo saw in the next moment was a single palm accompanying an immense aura, slithering in like a snake.
He had no means to dodge it, nor the strength to do so.
Pook! The palm clashed with his chest.
The front of his coat exploded, and a palm-shaped mark dug into his chest. Lightning flashed in front of his eyes.
Sol Ji-hoo briefly lost consciousness as his body was sent flying from the impact.
Ha! By the time he recovered his senses, a red sky was spread out before him.
His body was flying through the air. And soon, it slammed down on the ground like a used-up mop.
After a near-endless period of pain, Sol Ji-hoo could collapse at last. And at the end, awaited death.
Twisted kindness appeared above Sol Ji-hoo, who was gasping for breath with great difficulty. Looking down with a gaze that clearly lost all interest, Twisted kindness slowly raised her foot.
Exterminating the First Army commander.
I will chalk it up to a series of perfect circumstances, human. Speaking with a voice full of disappointment, she slammed her foot down without hesitation. It fell, shattering layers after layers of barriers like glass plates, until Sol Ji-hoo's body was suddenly pulled back. A cloud of black smoke was coiled around his armpits. Before Twisted kindness' foot smashed Sol Ji-hoo's head, Floan had taken hold of him and escaped at full speed. But she couldn't help but gape her mouth in shock in the next moment, as Twisted kindness immediately caught up to her. Don't get cheeky and hand him over. Hiek?
Floan shut her eyes, seeing Twisted kindness appear next to her in an instant.
As a fist carrying a terrifying aura hurled out toward the two of them, a large, swirling green light cut in between them. Pang! Two auras clashed violently.
The shockwave of the impact sent Sol Ji-hoo and Floan flying while Baek Haiju was also pushed back weakly. As for Twisted kindness, she stopped chasing after Sol Ji-hoo and paused when she saw the distinct green light wavering around Baek Haiju's body. After carefully observing it, she let loose a chuckle.
Awakening. No, you forcefully let it rampage. You would even bet your life on this?
Baek Haiju quickly picked herself back up, then reflexively covered her mouth.
She felt something rising from her stomach and wanted to vomit.
Seeing this, Twisted kindness clicked her tongue with pity.
I applaud you for wanting to save a comrade.
But you should know.
Even if you consume your life like this, you will only be dragging out the inevitable.
Baek Haiju did not reply.
She only glanced behind her and clenched her teeth. Fine. At least you'll be able to entertain me for a bit.
Perhaps not expecting anything from Sol Jihu any longer, Twisted Kindness took her mind off him and cracked her neck. To show my respect for your life-blazing fighting spirit, I will play along. Soon, two huge auras clashed fiercely.
On the other hand, Sol Jihu was lying in a dazed state.
The red sky of the spirit realm had turned even redder from the fresh blood dyeing his vision.
And while looking up at the sky endlessly, he suddenly felt his body turn warm. A white light was enveloping him.
A healing spell.
He felt his body recover slightly, but what followed was an indescribable pain.
His sense of pain had returned as he healed.
Hoo-ah! He would have screamed his head off if he could.
The sorry state that his body was in made him want to prefer death. While he had yet to take a closer look, he could tell easily just by seeing Seo Yuhui chanting a spell in shock and Maria splashing healing potions on him while crying. By the time this pain barely subsided, he was overcome with dejection. It didn't even feel like he had a fierce fight. He failed to make a single proper attack.
He was just beaten one-sidedly.
Recalling the previous fight, fear crept up and crawled on his skin. Insane. This is absolutely insane. He finally realized why Baek Haiju urged everyone to escape the moment Twisted Kindness appeared.
He also learned the significance of fully absorbing a god's divinity. Twisted Kindness was simply an unparalleled monster. In his current state, he wouldn't come out victorious even if he had 100 lives.
At that moment, a brilliant light spread out from Seo Yuhui's hand, which was placed on top of Sol Jihu's chest.
Up! His ears started working again. Get up!
Get up, you son of a bitch!
Maria was shouting while crying a river. She seemed to be getting angry to cope with the fact that everyone would probably die.
It seemed that his sense of hearing had recovered following his sense of pain as he could faintly hear loud ringing from a far distance. Why? Why can't you fight as you did back then? Why are you getting beaten so miserably?
You overwhelmed 3 commanders back then.
Sol Jihu blinked slowly.
Future vision.
A chuckle escaped his mouth.
If he could, he would have used it a long time ago.
However, future vision was an ability that activated at random.
Although it saved his life on several occasions, he knew it would be wishful thinking to expect it to activate whenever he was in danger.
Right,
he knew that.
But now that the situation had come to this, he couldn't help but put his hope in future vision.
Fuck.
And while thinking this, a curse came out by itself.
He had sworn never to rely on this ability ever again.
He almost cried for being so pathetic.
Looking back, it was always like this.
No matter how much effort he put in or how much he struggled, the result was always the same. The enemy always forced difficult trials and tribulations upon him as if to mock and laugh at his struggles.
Even when he broke through them by risking his life, only bigger despair would be waiting for him on the other side.
It was no different this time. In the end, nothing had changed.
I did what I could. I've had enough. It's exhausting. Now. No. Sol Jihu clenched his teeth.
He didn't come to the spirit realm to have such miserable thoughts. It wouldn't be too late to have regrets after he was dead. Until then, he had to find a way, even if he had to clutch at straws. It was at this moment. How? He heard a youthful voice.
Little Chick had gotten on top of his body before he noticed. It looked down at Sol Jihu's face, peering through the blood drenching it.
What are you going to do?
I understand.
You've come all this way, so obviously it would be a waste to give up. But why don't you lower your head and beg? Who knows, maybe that monster will accept your sincerity and give you a chance to rest. Sol Jihu's eyes shot open. Was that something to say in this situation?
Sol Jihu glared at the smirking little chick.
Why?
I think it's a decent way out. You'll get to keep your life at the very least. Shut up. Sol Jihu muttered in a cold voice and scowled in the next moment. He had tried to raise his upper body but was met with an acute pain that made him shiver.
His body was still refusing to listen to him.
I thought it was a kind offer though.
So what, you won't accept that monster's offer even if you die? Do you have any bright ideas?
I said, shut up. Feeling a vicious glare, little chick snorted.
What a scary face.
Anyway, if you're out of ideas.
Then, it grinned. Why don't you hear me out, partner? What?
You see, I agree with you.
Something didn't sit right with me.
I could tell something fishy was going on. Little chick's attitude suddenly changed.
Its smirking expression disappeared and was replaced by a serious look.
Listen, things aren't looking good right now. I'm sure you know that.
Its black pupils glinted with a firm resolution. I'll save you the boring explanation, so pay attention. Right now, a considerable number of spirits are gathered at the central area of the spirit realm.
I can feel their auras. The youngins we met must have brought other spirits.
They seem to have realized we're in a battle and are debating whether to come help. Those spirits. But they must not come here. They won't change a thing.
I'm sure you know why. Little chick spoke clearly in a subdued voice. So I will go over to them.
But I'm going to need you to lend me an archer, one who's quick on their feet.
It would be nice if that person is good with the bow as well.
You're going? That's right.
I'll go there and find a way out. You have to stay here until then and hold that monster down.
Both monsters, in fact. Sol Jihu blinked rapidly.
He didn't understand what little chick meant by all this.
But he didn't have the time to ask for details. He could feel little chick's will, the will of the Arcus spirit swearing to overturn this situation. So? Do you think you can do it?
Sol Jihu thought for a moment before shaking his head. No, he was about to shake his head. But he couldn't bring it upon himself to ruin a plan before it even started. If it's just a bit. Hilarious. Little chick snorted immediately. What's the point in acting tough?
It's not like I didn't see that monster beating the living hell out of you. How are you going to last?
You don't even know how long it'll take.
Sol Jihu was taken aback.
To be honest. Little chick sighed. I don't really like you all that much. It gave a rather out-of-the-blue evaluation.
But it seemed it wasn't expecting a reply as it turned around and quickly moved.
I've never seen someone so selfish in my entire life. All the achievements you've made so far only stemmed from you trying to protect your place of escape. And at other times, you act like a total manchild. Trotting lightly, it crossed its right wing. But, I'll admit, where it stopped was none other than Sol Jihu's right hand. In this hand was the spear of purity, which he refused to let go even in his current state. You're a hell of a lot better than people who stop at thinking and never carry it out in action. Little chick raised its foot and wiped away the blood on the upper section of the spear shaft, or, more specifically, where 7 concave holes were located. And more importantly, then, it glanced back. Gazing at the slightly dazed Sol Jihu, it grinned. I really like your refusal to give up. You burn your fighting spirit even in such a wretched state. At the very least, your fighting spirit surpasses the first clan head. With that, little chick pulled out the 3 feathers on its forehead. They were yellow, green, and blue feathers, respectively. Consider yourself lucky. You can even consider it an honor. Until now, I've never released more than 2 authorities. With that, holding your fighting spirit in high regard, I'll give you a pass, partner. Before Sol Jihu could say anything, little chick threw the feathers, which descended while swaying in the air. Then, the moment they gently landed on the spear of purity. Wong!
A vigorous sound resounded. As the three colors instantly dyed the spear of purity, Sol Jihu was startled by his own right hand, which began to shake like a coiling dragon. That wasn't all. An unfamiliar, beautiful voice filled his ears.
It whispered soft words that he couldn't make out. "This is…"
Sol Jihu subconsciously cupped his hand over his ear.
"Looks like you can finally hear it." Little Chick lifted its chin. "That's the spear of purity talking to you."
"The spear of purity?"
"That's right, partner." Little Chick nodded and continued.
"The spear of purity has been talking to you ever since you awakened it. Even in the previous fight, it was screaming and yelling in despair. You never heard a thing though."
Sol Jihu glanced at the spear of purity with a renewed gaze.
Having regained its true color before he noticed, the spear of purity was radiating a much clearer and intense light. It was the type of noble, solemn light that didn't give off a single impurity.
And, as Little Chick said, Sol Jihu began to hear it. "Wung. Wung.
Why can't you use me better?
No weapon is my match when it comes to annihilating evil. Please use me properly." Wung.
He could hear the spear of purity being upset and lamenting Sol Jihu's improper use of the spear. In the next moment, Sol Jihu tightly gripped the spear of purity as though he had been bewitched. As he roused the tiny stream of mana flowing in his body.
Biz!
The spear of purity resonated and spat out a previously non-existent cry. At the same time, Sol Jihu's eyes shot open, feeling a boundless power sweeping over from his right hand like a raging hail.
It was a powerful aura he had never felt before in his life.
As several alarms struck his ears, his eyes shot open and exploded out with elegant light.
"Miss Maria."
He spoke to the dazedly staring Maria with a subdued voice.
"Call Mr. Marcel Guionia over."
And raising his shaking hand, it drew the spear of purity at Twisted Kindness, the enemy moving in to finish off Baek Haiju. After being swept away by her huge, merciless torrent of despair and frantically struggling to escape.
Crescent Blade Spear Technique, First Ultimate Art, one with the spear, has been awakened. Crescent Blade Spear Technique,
Second Ultimate Art, Flying Spear, has been awakened. Crescent Blade Spear Technique, Third Ultimate Art, Formless Spear, has been awakened.
Finally, he managed to clutch onto a straw. A slightly tough, durable straw.
Then, as Twisted Kindness tried to seize Baek Haiju's neck after striking her Tathagata spear up.
Hua!
Unable to withstand the surging power, Sol Jihu bellowed his heart out and rushed forward.
Chapter 329. Yu-ah!
Sol Jihu rushed forward while letting out a bellow full of rage. Twisted Kindness, who had succeeded in grasping her hand around Baek Haiju's tender neck, glanced back. She returned to look at the struggling Baek Haiju in her grasp. Her face remained indifferent as if his actions didn't warrant her interest. However, her indifferent attitude only lasted a moment. Her eyes widened when she felt the energy behind her back increase exponentially. The moment she looked back with a frown, the spear that had been aimed at her suddenly slashed in the shape of the number 8.
Twisted Kindness blinked her eyes and tossed Baek Haiju away.
She then stepped on the ground, hard enough to make a small crater, and with a strong gust of wind, she began to display a splendid footwork technique.
She smoothly deflected the spear that cut at her from all directions and narrowed the distance with a zigzag movement. Shwick!
But as she did so, the spear's trajectory suddenly changed. The spear that had been slicing down suddenly switched into an upwards diagonal cut.
When Twisted Kindness urgently leaned backward, the spear's blade brushed past her chest.
Her face was full of surprise. The punk couldn't even see her movements before, so how was he suddenly predicting her movements and launching accurate attacks? What happened?
Twisted Kindness expressed her confusion while brandishing her tail.
The moment that her swishing tail was about to smack into him like a whip, Sol Jihu kicked off the ground while a tri-circular shield formed on his left hand. He narrowly deflected the tail by twisting his left arm before flying up like a butterfly and drawing back his right arm. At that moment, Twisted Kindness, who had been standing in front of him, suddenly vanished before appearing again behind Sol Jihu.
And as she was about to chop at his neck with the blade of her hand.
What? She felt an impact strike up her chin, catching her unaware.
Pock! With her head thrown back from the blow, Twisted Kindness quickly shifted her feet and retreated.
After allowing a hit for the first time, she stared in disbelief at Sol Jihu, who lightly landed on the ground. If she didn't see wrong, Sol Jihu had instantaneously flicked his arm to twist his spear mid-swing, all the while having his gaze fixed forward. That was how she was struck with the butt of the spear.
Ho! With this, she was now certain. He was seeing her movements. No, she wasn't sure whether he could read her movements correctly, but she was certain that he was sensing them and chasing after her. This is strange.
A bit too strange. She wanted to ask what was going on, but Sol Jihu was already on the move.
He kicked off the ground and sharply rushed at her as soon as he landed.
Should I test him out? After blocking his attack with a swing of her arm, Twisted Kindness retreated backward while carefully observing her opponent.
The battle soon resumed. Sol Jihu immediately chased after her and aimed his spear at her lower body.
Seeing the obvious attack, Twisted Kindness raised her foot. She intended to stomp him to the ground along with his spear, but the spear suddenly shifted from a forward thrust to an upward cut. As Sol Jihu busied his hands, the spear drew a large circle.
Twisted Kindness instinctively drew her head back, only to find a golden sword chi strengthened with rotational momentum sharply sweeping past the tip of her nose.
As she dodged out of the way, the spear immediately made a 180 degrees rotation before the butt of the spear came flying towards her temple.
Consequently, Twisted Kindness could only retreat again.
That wasn't all. Sol Jihu quickly narrowed the distance as if he didn't want to relent his chain of attacks. The moment the spearhead cycled and pointed towards the ground, he gripped the spear in a throwing stance and powerfully jabbed it down.
Twisted Kindness hastily lowered her waist to the lower left direction to avoid the attack before diagonally twisting it to the right as she swung her arm.
HMMP.
She flung her elbow out with the intention of bursting his head.
Because they were in such close proximity to each other, Sol Jihu had no choice but to avoid it by bending back his waist.
Thanks to that, his stance was momentarily broken.
Just when Twisted Kindness noticed this and was about to execute her flashy footwork again. Quang!
The ground suddenly shook as if the earth was churning. Twisted Kindness was stopped in her steps.
She had tried to hook his leg to make him lose his balance, but Sol Jihu had powerfully slammed down his spear as if telling her to fuck off. And when he succeeded in preventing her from hooking his legs, his spear shot toward her neck like a viper.
Twisted Kindness kicked up with her leg.
Her kick precisely hit the shaft of the spear, making the spearhead draw a sharp curve as it was flung up. As she was watching out in case it would strike down again, Twisted Kindness suddenly raised her eyebrows. Sol Jihu's arm, which had been raised up towards the sky, suddenly bent. Following the motions of his arm, the spear rotated and landed on his shoulders before it was aimed at her again. Next, he extended his arm forward and charged at her again, simultaneously placing his tri-circular shield in front of him. It was truly a relentless series of attacks that didn't allow his opponent to breathe. Expressing her slight irritation, Twisted Kindness skillfully used her leg that she had raised up. She squeezed the spear between her calf and her hamstring and forcibly drove it down. The spear stabbed into the ground as it was forcefully slammed down by her dreadful leg strength. When Twisted Kindness immediately loosened her leg and hit the spear shaft with her knee, the spearhead was driven deeper into the ground. At that same time, she gruffly grabbed the diagonally standing shaft with her left hand. Using it as a pivot,
She lowered her body and strongly punched out with her right arm.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened.
The moment she was convinced she got him.
!! A ray of light rushed at her side with a terrifying force.
Clicking her tongue, Twisted Kindness quickly swung the hand that she meant to twist Sol Jihu's neck with. And borrowing that twisting momentum, she heavily swung her tail as hard as she could. Pook!
When she checked the situation after feeling a solid hit, she saw a man and a woman sliding back from the blow on her front and left. As expected, the culprit that made her miss her chance was Baek Haiju.
Sol Jihu, who had his arms crossed in front of him, was seen slowly lowering his arms while rubbing them. A spectacular series of attacks and defense had occurred in a short amount of time. Twisted Kindness smacked her lips while seeing Sol Jihu collect his breath. It was a great reaction on her part considering the sudden attack, but she unfortunately couldn't accomplish her goal of capturing her opponent.
A gap had been created due to the sudden attack, allowing Sol Jihu a chance to react.
Even so, she made some gains.
Glancing sideways at the spear of purity stuck on the ground, Twisted Kindness asked, "What happened?"
Your movements improved too much. It's almost incomparable to before.
Why didn't you fight like this sooner? Did you purposely hide your ability?
No, that shouldn't be the case. Feeling her body slightly warmed up, her words became faster. Speak.
Did some kind of change happen?
Hearing Twisted Kindness press him,
Sol Jihu, who had been collecting his breath, spoke up. If I tell you. He paused before licking his lips and continuing again. Will you give us a chance to rest? What?
Thinking about it again. I feel like it'd be a waste not to take you up on your offer from before.
I'm asking whether you'll let us rest if I change my mind now.
Twisted Kindness blinked. Ah ha ha ha.
You truly are an unpredictable man.
She burst into loud laughter before shaking her head.
It'll dampen my excitement a little, but fine.
If you can satisfy my curiosity, then I am willing to accept it.
Really?
Of course.
If I can enjoy another life or death fight as interesting as before, then there is no reason for me not to do so.
Twisted Kindness generously continued. Now, hurry up and speak. I wouldn't have even asked if you had used a simple awakening skill to momentarily increase your energy.
But that's not it.
You became too different.
It's a phenomenon that I truly can't understand.
But Sol Jihu didn't easily answer her.
His quickly darting eyes seemed to be conflicted. Can I really trust you?
Of course.
What if you attack me after I tell you?
Ha!
Have you been fooled your whole life? Haven't I sworn using my name? If you really doubt me that much, then take your break now. It doesn't matter if you tell me after you rest.
The conditions are too good.
Only. After giving the spear of purity a slight nudge, Twisted Kindness stepped forward.
I'll return your weapon once I hear your reply.
You might not tell me once you rest after all.
I guess.
Sol Jihu nodded his head.
He didn't know what she meant by swearing using her name, but he acted convinced. Good, then. Sol Jihu was still vigilant as he slowly knelt on one knee. Twisted Kindness shrugged her shoulders before straightening her posture. Sol Jihu let out a deep sigh before quietly speaking. First. Yes. First?
Just as Twisted Kindness repeated his word with twinkling eyes. Sol Jihu's eyes widened. At the same moment, he bolted forward like a professional sprinter.
Twisted Kindness scowled when she felt the wind mixed with thick killing intent.
Not mentioning the fact that he attacked when he said he was going to rest, she wondered what he was going to do rushing in barehanded. At that moment, she could feel a sudden rise of energy behind her. It was a holy power that was so powerful that it stung her back. When Twisted Kindness reflexively turned around, she became greatly astonished. The spear of purity that was stuck in the ground was now floating in the air. As if that wasn't enough, it was currently flying in a straight line towards her.
Crescent blade spear technique, second ultimate art, flying spear.
The sharp and acute sensation quickly approached her as if it intended to pierce through her.
What?
Greatly surprised, Twisted Kindness hastily assumed her stance.
However, at that moment, Urya!
Sol Jihu, who had recklessly charged at her, accelerated and slammed his shoulders into her.
The moment Twisted Kindness realized her mistake, her balance had already been broken.
But when the spear of purity headed straight towards where her face was as she tripped forwards.
"You punk!"
As she shouted in rage, a pair of wings spread wide open, directly propelling her up in her collapsed posture.
Twisted Kindness felt a burning sensation narrowly brushing past her abdomen.
However, when she tried to circle around in the sky and steady herself, she felt her entire body go stiff.
She only realized after she was airborne that the entire sky was crisscrossed in white wires like a spiderweb. And on top of the wires was Baek Haiju, who jumped up one step ahead of her, ready to strike her Tathagata spear down. No way!
Before she could finish that thought, Baek Haiju swung both her arms down in full force.
Twisted Kindness' face turned dazed. It was because she felt it. It wasn't just the spiderweb and Baek Haiju.
The spear of purity that she thought had missed was pointing upright and flying straight at her as if it was homing in on her. That wasn't all. As Sol Jihu kicked off the ground and jumped up to grab the flying spear, the spear erupted with a golden energy. Above her was the Tathagata spear slashing down while wrapped in a green sword chi, and below her was the spear of purity with added momentum, piercing towards her as if to pierce even the sky itself.
Twisted Kindness' mouth gaped open. And in that split-second moment, "Kuu!"
she roared furiously while releasing a powerful energy. After confronting them with just her physical strength all this time, she finally decided to use her energy.
Asterisk. Meanwhile, go straight ahead just like this.
I said to go faster.
Marcel Guionia was currently running at full speed.
Given his personality, it was something he would normally never do, but Sol Jihu's command and the situation forced him to flee. As a matter of fact, he wouldn't have been of much help even if he stayed. But if he was successful in this mission, the whole situation would turn around.
Marcel Guionia believed in those words and used his mana to sprint crazily.
How much time went by? Just as his forehead was full of sweat and a sweet taste could be felt in his mouth, he began to hear a commotion off in the distance. There they are. Little Chick, who had been hustling Marcel Guionia from the top of his head, spoke. As it said, the source of the noise was a gathering of spirits. While they were many in number, they seemed to be huddled together, unable to do anything. Stop here. Don't go too close. Marcel Guionia stopped. When he panted and wiped the sweat flowing down his face, he suddenly heard a small gasp from the top of his head. What's that? Marcel Guionia became perplexed when he lifted his eyes. What? What are nests doing here? In front of him was a huge lake. Though it may have looked beautiful in the past, the lake was now black, polluted with wastewater. And lying inside the lake half submerged were none other than nests. To be more precise, 5 enormous nests, boasting a size bigger than most buildings, were surrounding a withered tree, each having a few tentacles attached to it. From the bulging of their bumpy surfaces, it was certain that they were alive. Nests? Are those what you call nests? Wait a moment. They're different from normal nests. At the questioning of Little Chick, Marcel Guionia hurriedly inspected the nests. He soon figured out the difference. It wasn't just their stupidly large sizes. Their colors were different as well. The surface of normal nests was mostly gray. However, the nests that were submerged in the lake were dyed in 5 colors: dark red, water blue, jade green, clay brown, and sky blue. Speak. What's different?
While Marcel Guionia explained to Little Chick, the spirits noticed their arrival and rushed toward them.
How did it go? Why did only the two of you come? Are they still fighting? They're not dead, right?
Right? When the spirits grew loud. Quiet! Little Chick snapped. The surroundings quickly became silent. Little Chick folded its tiny wings and fell into thought. Damn it! I was wondering why there weren't any troops protecting this place. The nests themselves are pretty strong. I felt it.
They all went towards that direction, right?
Should we go and attack them?
Don't be ridiculous.
None of you will survive even a single sweep of her hand.
Then what are we supposed to do? You said we didn't have much time.
Tell us what to do, quick.
They weren't wrong.
Although Little Chick gave Soul Jihu its power, even Little Chick could tell that Twisted Kindness wasn't using her full strength. It was unknown how long the expedition team would hold out. There wasn't any time to think. No, even if they did, they would need to first take action before finding a solution. The situation was simply that urgent.
I guess there's no choice.
Little Chick smacked its mouth before sneaking a glance at the spirits.
Then, it spoke.
You guys. Chapter 330. As Soul Jihu and Baek Haiju were attacking from the front and back, an intense light burst out from Twisted Kindness' body.
The light was so dazzling that it was almost blinding. As a consequence, Soul Jihu plummeted to the ground like a suddenly dropping elevator.
The cause of the intense light and the enormous surge of energy was none other than divinity.
The power of a god burned the spiderweb in an instant and even pushed Soul Jihu down easily.
It was the same for Baek Haiju. Swept away by the sudden storm, she fell like a kite. Damn it! Soul Jihu lamented as he kicked the ground.
Success was at the tip of his finger, so he couldn't help but get disappointed when it disappeared like a mirage. They should have sealed the deal while Twisted Kindness had her guard down. Unfortunately, their one and only chance came to an end in vain.
Most likely, their previous tactic would not work a second time. We need to get back to Tiggle Fortress as soon as possible.
Again, this expedition did not end at just defeating the two army commanders. Taking into account the time it would take to rescue the spirit realm and resurrect the world tree, they were already too far behind schedule. The problem was that they couldn't even deal with the army commanders in front of them. Soul Jihu bit his lip and looked up at the sky. The light had subsided before he noticed, and Twisted Kindness was standing tall and glaring down at him. Judging by her noticeably flushed cheeks and neck, she must be enraged without a doubt.
The situation had only become more difficult. Since she was almost defeated, she probably would not continue going easy on them. And indeed, Twisted Kindness' heart was beating with rage. The previous action of releasing energy was done subconsciously by her survival instinct. In other words, her senses had judged that the previous attack could have been fatal. When was the last time she felt a threat to her life since fully absorbing a divinity? She couldn't even remember. Twisted Kindness' mouth turned crooked at the sensation she had not felt in a long time. I'll take back what I said earlier. She calmly spoke. It wasn't because you got lucky or because the circumstances lined up. Bringing such circumstances about and achieving a goal should certainly be considered as part of one's ability. You are worthy of having exterminated Undying Diligence. Twisted Kindness' evaluation of him went up, but Soul Jihu did not look happy in the slightest. Just as he thought, Twisted Kindness' tone made it clear that she would no longer be going easy on them. Phew! Twisted Kindness' heart was beating quickly, but her head was calmly analyzing the situation. Her personal philosophy was that a battle was an exchange of resources. The outcome of a battle was decided by the amount of energy, techniques, and physical prowess one had and by how efficiently they used them. There was a simple reason that Twisted Kindness had acted with such leisure until now. None of her enemies were ever capable of handling her resources. Only Baek Haiju could to a certain degree.
Other than her, no one was able to lay a finger on her, so all she had to do was pour all her resources onto one person. But with Sol Ji-hoo rejoining the battle, the situation had changed. Although she couldn't understand how he suddenly became so strong, what she knew for certain was that her opponent's resources had increased by a significant amount. If they used their resources in an effective manner like before, the same situation as before could happen again. Not to mention, there was no guarantee what the Star of Lust and Avarice would do. Such was the nature of a battle against many. Now having to pay attention to two people at once, Twisted Kindness felt a slight apprehension. But the solution was simple. She simply had to increase her budget and acquire more resources, just like her enemies. She had two methods of doing so. The first was to call an ally of her own. Raging Temperance. The unicorn raised its head after suddenly having its name called out. Until now, the Fourth Army commander had been quietly spectating the battle from Twisted Kindness' threat. Of course, he wasn't just watching and was also treating his wounds. Join the battle. Quote. I will take back what I said before. Don't just sit there and help. I need your strength. What? Raging Temperance was taken aback. I won't repeat myself again. Twisted Kindness still had a commanding tone but asked for assistance first after having acted alone thus far. Raging Temperance was surprised seeing the firmly speaking Twisted Kindness. Then, he stared at the expedition team with a renewed gaze. He couldn't help but wonder just how amazing they must be to make this proud and egotistical dragon go back on her words. In the next moment, the Fourth Army commander got up. Though he wanted to mock Twisted Kindness, he could tell how serious she was. She wouldn't be asking for his help just to have an easier time. Don't tell me. It must be because she saw a slight possibility, no matter how slim, of the unthinkable happening. Fine. From now on, I will help as well. Just like that, the spectating Raging Temperance announced his return to battle. The faces of the expedition team members paled. It really felt like they were being kicked while down. But that wasn't all. Twisted Kindness still had another method. I get it now. She stared at Sol Ji-hoo with a deep gaze and spoke. I understand the Queen's intent. I've never seen a constellation like you. You are truly an absurd star. She said something he couldn't quite understand. The Queen was right. It might have been better to just leave you be. Speaking with strength. But she also said this. She crossed her hands over and grabbed the swords by her waist. The twin swords were unsheathed with a swish. They looked like ordinary longswords on the surface. However, they were dripping with blood despite being revealed to the world only now. The twin swords looked incredibly ominous. A salmon swimming upstream cannot change the flow of water, no matter how much it rampages. Next, neatly bringing her legs together in the air, Twisted Kindness held the twin swords in a reverse grip and slowly raised her arms. Right. No matter how incredible of a constellation you are. Standing just like a cross. In the end, you will only be one of the many stars in the vast universe. She spread out her wings in full. Heaven and earth, all creation, one. And simultaneously looking down at Sol Ji-hoo, her pupils abruptly slid open vertically. I will put everything on the line and return you to the void. On the other hand, at the Tiggle Fortress, the Federation was in a bloody battle that the word horrific could not even begin to describe. One would be able to smell the blood just by looking at the gruesome sight. The mess started from the walls. All sorts of flying creatures were rampaging in the sky. Although the beastmen ran around brandishing their sharp claws and the cave fairies fought back by launching themselves into the air, they were at odds against the sheer number of enemies. No matter how many they killed, there was no end in sight. Even the sky looked black from the swarm of parasites. Awk! At that moment, a cave fairy, stabbed by the claws of a pterosaur, was pulled into the sky, screaming.
When the pterosaur dropped her, she fell while flailing her arms until she hit the ground and shattered her bones and organs. Her ruined body soon became food for the starving parasites. With the walls being like this, the sight below was even more of a spectacle. Corpses were piled up on top of each other, forming an enormous mountain. And swarming corpses and parasites were stepping on this mountain to climb up like a rising tide. Over there! Stop them!
Stop theme. Sky fairies were madly firing one arrow after the other, but it was futile in the face of such an overwhelming number. In fact, they only became targets for the evil phantoms that sniped them from a distance, and their perforated bodies fell and became part of the mountain of corpses. With the situation being like this, it was only natural for the defending Federation members to contact the higher-ups for reinforcements every minute.
The thunder is ready. A new thunder arrived at the perfect moment. It was crafted by the dwarves only a moment ago. Kook!
Gabriel bit her lower lip. Though this was good news, she fully knew it would only extinguish the fire for a moment. It would blaze up again once the nests and reproductive species gave birth to new soldiers. This was the reason that the 5 armies had yet to join the battle.
With the world tree gone, the thunder was the only way the Federation could, somewhat, deal with the army commanders.
The Federation knew this as well, and that was why they tried their hardest to procure as many of them as possible.
Still. Damn it. They were starting to run low.
But that didn't mean they could sit back and watch the current development continue. Judging that there was no other choice, Gabriel clenched her teeth and shouted, "Detonate the thunder!" Soon after the order fell, a thunderous explosion burst out from every direction of the fortress. The sky regained its original color as the black creatures filling the sky were wiped away by a blue ray of light. But that only lasted a moment. Soon, new troops flooded in from the distance like hail. However, they did not have the time to despair. The western wall. The eastern watchtower fell. We need to send reinforcements as soon as possible. Requests for reinforcements came from every side. Gabriel couldn't blame them. The harsh reality was that every place was on the brink of collapse. The problem was that she had no means to help. She had run out of reinforcements to send and thunders to detonate. So this is it. It was easy to see. She could tell just by looking at the wall right in front of her. The corpses of the Federation army were sprawled everywhere, and it was rare to see anyone standing in one piece. There's no way out. Staring blankly at the sky as it darkened once more, Gabriel gently closed her eyes. She could finally see the end that seemed far out of reach at first. Should we retreat? In the end, such thought crossed her mind, fully knowing what would happen to Paradise once they gave up on Tiggle Fortress. The moment Gabriel opened her closed eyes and meekly gazed beyond the fortress. She blinked. The corpse army had stopped its march. The parasites had also stopped and were turning their bodies in one direction. Just what happened? As Gabriel reflexively turned in the direction that the enemy was facing, she became dazed. She had no other choice. In the distant mountain ridge, shadows began to appear one by one. Pooh! As the sound of a bugle rang out in the next moment, the battlefield turned silent in an instant. Before she noticed, the shadows stretched horizontally and filled the entire mountain ridge. Pooh! The sound of a bugle echoed out once again. As Gabriel snapped out of her daze, she heard the sound of footsteps running toward her in a hurry. Urgent news! Urgent news! The sky fairy that rushed toward her prostrated before Gabriel. The communication line reconnected. Communication line? Gabriel asked back in a daze. Yes. Eva has sent reinforcements. Where? A beast man whose fur was drenched in blood asked in disbelief. He couldn't be blamed as humanity had turned a blind eye while the Beastman alliance collapsed and had refused every request the Federation made thus far. Eva sent reinforcements? Impossible. You must be joking.
When the beastman asked again, the sky fairy raised her trembling arm.
Above her palm was a communication crystal that was lit up. The surrounding gazes all gathered on the crystal ball, which was showing a cavalry standing in straight lines.
Gabriel's eyes widened. If her eyes weren't lying to her, the person standing at the head of the army was a human.
A human riding a horse, her pink hair fluttering in the wind.
It really is. The beastman shut his mouth. They had been on the verge of despair.
It's not just Eva.
The sniffling of the sky fairy broke the silence.
Oder, Grazia, Caligo, and Haramark all sent reinforcements. With teary eyes.
Furthermore, these 5 cities have issued draft calls to all Earthlings.
Even executors came.
3 of them. And trembling lips.
The humans have sent reinforcements.
Looking around at the higher-ups who were still in disbelief. Humanity. With a voice choked with tears, she spoke again. Has answered the Federation's call for help.
The fuse of war that was on the brink of blowing out was rekindled.
You guys.
At the same time.
Sacrifice your bodies. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Go die, I mean. Hurry.
The spirits fell into disarray at Little Chick's words. Ha! Just like that?
Stop.
As a question was about to come out, Little Chick raised its voice.
I thought I made this clear. I don't have any time to explain. But.
Why? Are you suddenly afraid of death? What did you say?
Little Chick's mocking comment angered the spirits.
Unless you're complete idiots, you must know why only the 2 of us came here.
That's. The humans who came to help you are fighting with their lives on the line. They are relying on us to succeed. Opening square bracket ellipsis dot closing square bracket. If you really want an explanation, I'll give it to you.
But just know this.
The longer we take, the higher the probability of us failing.
The spirits fell silent at Little Chick's intimidation.
What's your decision?
When Little Chick urged for an answer. We just have to go fight? One spirit carefully asked. That's right.
Fight. Fight to the bitter end.
Even if you die, don't die so easily.
Resist until the very last moment. Resist, and resist again.
Only then can you die. Make sure they are solely focused on you. That's all we need to do.
That's enough.
It's also the only thing you guys can do.
Now hurry. At Little Chick's urging, the spirits turned around. And soon. You-wah.
The spirits gathered at the center of this world began to charge toward the lake.
Naturally, the nests began to react.
They must have seen the spirits flying in from all directions as hundreds of tentacles resting on the surface of the lake shot up. Marcel Guionia watched the battle at the lake unfold with a look of devastation.
This couldn't even be called a battle. The spirits were being slaughtered by the tentacles and dropping like flies. No matter how he looked at it, it was closer to a one-sided massacre. Oi, Archer. Little Chick spoke to him at that moment. I hear your sniping skills are top-notch.
Archer of Steel is your title, isn't it? Hearing this, Marcel Guionia got down on the ground amidst the chaos. Not only was it too late to turn back, but he also realized what Little Chick was trying to do.
Good.
Then before you knock your arrow, tie the things you got from partner to the arrow. The seed in the sedges?
If my prediction is correct, the Spirit Kings should be inside those nests. Marcel Guionia flinched while preparing to snipe. I'm certain. I heard that monster mention an experiment. The parasites must have concocted a plan that uses the spirits. In that case, the experiment most likely must be the parasitization of spirits. No way. Marcel Guionia's face distorted. That was one thing that should not be allowed.
They had to stop it no matter what.
If their plan ends in success, the outcome will be devastating.
But it looks like they haven't succeeded yet.
This might be our chance. Chance? Marcel Guionia asked as he tightly tied the seed and the sedges to his arrow. Little Chick pointed at the middle of the 5 nests.
Because the main body is still remaining. You mean the world tree is still alive?
No, I never said that.
I said it's remaining.
Little Chick continued. There's no need to think so hard.
Imagine that there is a dead person in front of you.
But we have a miracle potion that can revive the dead.
Then all we need to do is feed the potion to the dead person.
Marcel Guionia finally understood what Little Chick was asking from him. It wanted him to shoot an arrow tied to the seed and the sedges and hit the world tree.
It wasn't that he didn't have questions.
All sorts of possibilities flashed by his head. Even if the world tree revived, what if the nests surrounding it got stronger as a result? But
all I have to do is hit the mark?
As long as you can make the arrow dig into it. Those words were enough. Marcel Guionia knocked the arrow and readied his posture. If he was going to do this, it was better to get it over with as soon as possible. After all, the chances of them being discovered would go up as the number of spirits dwindled. But in truth, this was a near impossible task.
Hitting a stationary target was nothing difficult, but the path his arrow needed to take to get there was too steep. Not only did it need to break through the hundreds of tentacles flying about in the air, but it also had to miss the spirits. In the finals of a soccer game drawing the eyes of the entire world, a professional player going into overtime after completing 45 minutes of the second half at a 2-3 disadvantage, and then stepping onto the penalty box for a game-deciding goal. Could this be what he feels then?
An immense pressure pressed down on Marcel Guionia. However, this wasn't a matter where he could ask if he could do it.
No, it was a matter that he had to do it, a matter that had to be done.
As such, Marcel Guionia shook off any idle thoughts.
Once he emptied his mind and focused, every cell in his body woke up and wriggled. As he slowly breathed in, the cold air seeped into his lungs and turned his body cold. Next, everything became faint. The sounds agitating his mind scattered away, and the tentacles throwing his narrowed eyes into chaos hazily changed.
And so, the moment a withered tree filled his sight. The moment his restrained breath leaked out and halted. The moment his hair slightly blew in the wind.
A subdued breath, an unshaking hand, and a gently blowing wind. The moment everything perfectly fell into place, Marcel Guionia's right eye shot open.
At the same time, his ice-cold finger let go of the bowstring. Ping! With a short sonic wave, the mass-like arrow shot forward.
It was a fantastic shot without even the slightest trembling. In place of Sol Jihu and the expedition team, the arrow of steel carrying the wish of the Federation and humanity flew toward the world tree.
1. I'm fairly confident these are the names of her twin swords, though it's never clarified or explained.